Chapter 660. However, Wu-Ming was not powerful enough to teleport everyone out of the outer sect in an instant. Because I already knew that the Demon King would attack, I had been wandering around the outer sect for the past few days. But in fact, I was setting up a space technique. The purpose was to be useful at this moment. Wu-Ming explained. Wu-Ming's spatial spell was a spell that Wu-Ming had researched himself. Its main body was the Lune Rune, and its auxiliary body was the magic of Yggdrasil, World Tree. It was not that Wu-Ming was talented, but Wu-Ming's noble artifact, the nameless spellbook, helped him create the spatial spell. As everyone knew, heroic spirits could no longer increase their strength because they were dead, and their noble artifacts could no longer grow. That was the tragedy of being a fighter for two great restraints. Although it was an iron rule for heroic spirits, it did not affect Wu-Ming at all. The simplest and crudest reason was that Wu-Ming was still alive. Cough, cough. In the beginning, Wu-Ming refined his weapon into a noble artifact because his noble artifact had greater possibilities and growth potential. That was why Wu-Ming followed Skaha's suggestion to refine his noble artifact. After all, if Wu-Ming's noble artifact could not grow, then it would be useless to Wu-Ming, who was a root dragon. Of course, Wu-Ming was the only one who had the ability to upgrade normal weapons and even non-weapons into relics and make them grow. The nameless spellbook was the best example. After following Wu-Ming for so many years, although it was not directly baptized by the root dragon, the nameless spellbook was indirectly affected. Although it was not that powerful, the nameless spellbook could fuse the Lune Rune and Yggdrasil, World Tree, magic to form a new magic spell or magic. Just like that, Wu-Ming wanted this spatial spell. After recording the Lune Rune into the nameless spellbook, the book automatically created this special spatial spell. However, in White Yiksha's opinion, no matter how special it was, it could not be so overpowered. He could teleport everyone within the spatial spell's range with a snap of his fingers. Did he have to be so overpowered? Of course, it was not that overpowered. That was because the target of Wu-Ming's spatial spell was not land or buildings, nor was it engraved in space. It was for everyone. After all, whether it was engraving the spatial spell on buildings or space, there was a possibility of failure. This failure did not refer to engraving the spatial spell, but because Wu-Ming needed to teleport people. Wu-Ming could not guarantee that everyone who was engraved with the spatial spell would be teleported away when he activated the spell. Therefore, Wu-Ming chose to engrave the spatial spell on everyone. Don't fool me. White Yiksha narrowed his eyes at Wu-Ming. How many people came to participate in the fire dragon's birth ceremony? Based on tens of millions of people, that was still a conservative estimate. Therefore, how could Wu-Ming inscribe spatial tactics for so many people in such a short time? Moreover, it was not as if there were no powerhouses among them. How could they not realize that they had been engraved with someone else's spell? Moreover, if nothing unexpected happened, these people were now in the enemy's gift competition. Logically speaking, they should not be teleported away. When White Yiksha asked one question after another, Wu-Ming patiently explained to him. First of all, the answer to the first question is that this spatial spell has the attribute of transmission and multiplication. White Yiksha, who was not stupid, understood Wu-Ming's simple explanation. Because of transmission, when the person with the spatial spell on their body comes into contact with others, they will transmit their spatial spell to the other person. And because of multiplication, the spatial spell will split and multiply once when it is transmitted. Wu-Ming did not continue. White Yiksha understood everything. According to what Wu-Ming said, every time the person with the spatial spell on their body came into contact with others, the spatial spell on the pathogen would split and multiply once. The extra one would be transmitted to the person in contact with the pathogen. In this way, a second pathogen would be formed. The powerful ability to split and multiply, in addition to Wu-Ming constantly running to various places in the outer sect to spread the virus, allowed Wu-Ming to engrave his spatial spell on everyone in a short few days. How did Wu-Ming add these complicated effects into the spatial spell? Did you think the nameless spellbook was useless? But how did you guarantee that you would not be discovered by others? White Yiksha asked. Not to mention people like White Yiksha, even if the people who came to participate in the fire dragon's birth ceremony were weak, there would definitely be many people who could discover this spatial spell. After all, this was the courtyard. Even if they were weak, they still had the gift of miracles accompanying them. I will answer this and the third question together. The third question was, how did Wu Ming make these people, who were under the authority of another person's host, leave the other person's home field and be teleported out? That's because the fire dragon's birth ceremony was already under my authority of the host. Because it was under Wu Ming's authority of the host, even White Yiksha did not discover anything strange. Impossible. When the host's authority is activated, there will definitely be a contract document. White Yiksha instantly refuted Wu Ming. But Wu Ming smiled at this. Who told you I didn't issue a contract document? Wu Ming smiled and snapped his fingers. Golden ripples appeared behind him. The mountain of white parchment paper seemed to have a breakthrough and surged out from this golden ripple. The host's authority had the ability to force others to participate in their gift competition. Moreover, when the host's authority was activated, a contract document would appear. The way it appeared could be chosen by the person who activated the host's authority. Whether it appeared out of thin air or descended from the sky, it could all be chosen by oneself. Wu Ming chose to descend from the sky. However, the contract document was issued, but the host's authority did not stipulate that it had to be forced for participants to see the contract document. Since that was the case, it was much more convenient for Wu Ming. Therefore, the moment these contract documents appeared, they were immediately intercepted by Wu Ming himself. Do you still remember the flame text that appeared in the sky on the day of the fire dragon's birth ceremony? Wu Ming asked with a smile. Of course I remember. At that time, it seemed like it was according to your suggestion to make these flame texts disappear in the form of fireworks. After White Yiksha finished speaking, he instantly felt that something was wrong. Could it be? White Yiksha suddenly looked at Wu Ming. That's right. It's just as you think, White Yiksha. Wu Ming smiled proudly. Chapter 661. Wu Ming had suggested that the flaming text should appear in different colors. After using it as a signboard, they would light it up like fireworks in order not to be wasted. Fireworks of different colors were lit up together, bringing about enthusiasm for the people attending the fire dragon's birth ceremony. The fire dragon's birth ceremony was so wide that the flaming text that appeared in the sky was destined to cover almost the entire venue. Wu Ming had activated the organizer's authority when the flaming text was lit up like fireworks. Then, when the contract appeared, Wu Ming had activated his relic, Dragonist. The current Dragonist was no worse than Gilgamesh's Babylon treasure vault. The only thing that could be said was that the storage space was not very big. That was why Wu Ming had only opened a hole in his relic space. The contract documents were like a raging wave that had broken through a dam, gushing out crazily. At that time, with the help of the beautiful colors of the fireworks, Wu Ming's golden ripples had successfully swallowed all the contract documents that had just appeared in the sky. It had taken less than 3 seconds. Then, the fireworks had disappeared, and Wu Ming's golden ripples had all been shut down. Nobody had noticed anything unusual. No, it should be said that there were people who had noticed the appearance of the golden ripples, but they had all treated the golden ripples as the special effects of the fireworks. It was the same for White Yiksha. That was why White Yiksha had instantly understood when Wu Ming had mentioned it. She was also one of the people who had noticed the golden ripples. After all, even with the cover of the fireworks, the golden ripples were too conspicuous. If she had known beforehand that the fireworks of Salamandra would not produce golden ripples, or if she had asked about it afterward, White Yiksha would definitely have been suspicious. However, it was impossible for White Yiksha to ask about the fireworks of Salamandra, just like how Shadora had not asked Mandela about the golden ripples. She had also treated the golden ripples as a special effect. As for Mandela, when Wu Ming had made that suggestion, he had already guessed that Wu Ming was up to something. When he had seen the golden ripples, he had guessed that it was Wu Ming's doing. However, how could Mandela, who was already in cahoots with Wu Ming, expose his allies' plan? In the end, Wu Ming's plan, which had a lot of loopholes, had been perfectly implemented under everyone's neglect. You. White Yiksha did not know what to say. Wuming's plan had left her speechless. Now, White Yiksha finally understood why Wuming's space technique could teleport everyone away from the Devil Lord's home ground. It was because the Devil's Lord had activated the organizer's authority in Wuming's home ground. It was as if a group of criminals wanted to kill someone, and then they rushed into that person's house with knives. In the end, the criminals rushed in and found that it was actually a fully staffed weapons and ammunition depot. It was all for nothing. Pest's organizer's authority could be used when Wuming was not doing anything. However, when Wuming started to take action, her organizer's authority had already lost its effect. To put it simply, Wuming was the first authority and Pest was the second authority. When the first authority was not doing anything, the second authority was in charge. However, when the first authority spoke, the second authority was nothing. However, due to Pest's uniqueness, I can't do anything about the seal she placed on you. Wuming smiled at White Yiksha. Although Wuming had a way to remove the Black Death's vengeance against the sun, it would take too much time. It would be better for him to directly look for Pest. Humph. Of course, I know that. Don't worry about me. Hurry up and defeat the enemy. Didn't you say that there might be other enemies? Hurry up and leave. Although I can't move and can't use much of my strength, I still have ways to protect myself. Then I'll take my leave first, White Yiksha. After saying this, Wuming opened a transport gate and left. When White Yiksha saw Wuming leaving, he sighed. Really, it would have been better if you had told me earlier. You even made me worried. White Yiksha complained. Then, he closed his eyes and began to rest. Wuming left through the transport gate and arrived at the roof of a house. What entered his eyes was a scene of a 3 versus 3 battle. Reverse 16 Knights was fighting with Pest's subordinate, the man in military uniform. When Wuming saw the man in military uniform erupting with a powerful aura that was completely different from before, he frowned. Has he become a god? After all, Wuming was half a god slayer. No matter which world it was, Wuming was quite sensitive toward the definition of a god. I'm afraid that he has obtained a godhead. After all, in this world, as long as one had a godhead, one would be a god. As for where the man in military uniform had obtained his godhead, wasn't it obvious? Naturally, it was given to him by his master, Pest. Although this made things awkward for a god, in the box court world, becoming a god was as simple as that. After Wuming finished speaking, he stopped watching the fight between the two men. Although the man in military uniform had obtained a godhead and seemed to be fighting Reverse 16 Knights quite well, Wuming, who was familiar with Reverse 16 Knights' strength, knew that it was only a matter of time before the man in military uniform would be defeated. Then, Wuming looked toward Pest's subordinate, the woman in revealing clothes. She was in a deadlock with Kasuga Biao. No, it should be said that she was about to lose. At this moment, this female subordinate of Pest's was starting to become faintly discernible. This meant that she was about to disappear. Wuming could clearly sense the aura of his origin fire from her body. Although Kasuga Biao was unable to fully control the power he obtained from Wuming, he could use Wuming's origin fire as a bomb. Although it was very likely that he would injure himself, this was a killing move that could kill his enemy in a single strike. Pest's female subordinate did not disappear immediately. It was likely that something had taken the hit for her. As for the unknown person or object that had taken the hit for her, it was burned to ashes by the origin fire. Then, Wuming looked toward Pest. To Wuming's surprise, Pest had also become a god. Is this the boost from Hamiltown, or did someone give Pest a godhead? Wuming guessed. Pest was currently fighting against the Black Rabbit, who was wielding a golden lightning bolt. Upon closer inspection, the Black Rabbit was not wielding a golden lightning bolt at all. It was clearly a Vajra with golden lightning bolts on it. That was most likely the Sakra's god relic, or rather, a simulated god relic. As the Sakra's dependent, it was naturally not strange for you two to possess the Sakra's god relic. Although the lightning bolts could not do anything to Pest, they could not harm her either. However, the black mist that Pest released from her sleeves that carried the aura of death would brush past the black rabbit's body every single time. When he sensed the aura of death from the black mist that was much more powerful than the black mist that trapped the white yiksha, Wuming believed that if the black mist hit the black rabbit head-on, it would definitely die instantly since it did not possess any defensive gifts. At this moment, the black rabbit's expression turned grim when it saw Wuming's arrival. Its movements slowed down slightly. However, this slowed down his movements by a bit, allowing Pest to seize the opportunity. In an instant, Pest arrived behind the black rabbit with a furious expression on her face. She aimed her pitch-black sleeves at the back of the black rabbit's head. Goodbye, Sakra's dependent. Chapter 662. Hearing those words, Black Rabbit was greatly alarmed. Immediately after, a large amount of black mist sprayed out from Pest's sleeve. However, the black mist did not hit Black Rabbit. Instead, it hit a purple-black ripple. Villo? Black Rabbit cried out in pleasant surprise. Seeing this familiar ripple, how could Black Rabbit not know who saved him? Sure enough, there was also a ripple beside the Villo. Countless amounts of black mist sprayed out from the ripple. The ripple in front of Black Rabbit was connected to the ripple beside Wuming. Just like that, Pest's attack was diverted away. Tisk, Pest spat in a very displeased manner. Soon after, she stopped releasing the wind of death and quickly pulled away from Black Rabbit. The Black Rabbit also suddenly jumped and came to Wuming's side. Reverse 16 Knights dragged his blood-stained right arm and jumped onto the roof where Wuming was at almost the same time as Black Rabbit, together with Hiroi Buyao who was gasping for breath. Reverse 16 Knights jumped onto the roof where Wuming was at. When 16 Knights and Yao arrived at Wuming's roof, as well as the instant when Wuming saw Pest, he immediately understood what had happened. Most likely, the two subordinates of Pest who were fighting Reverse 16 Knights and Hiroi Buyao had already left. Wuming calmly put away the teleportation gate that was no longer releasing the wind of death. Soon after, he took out a crystal bottle containing a red healing potion and tossed it to Reverse 16 Knights. Thanks. Reverse 16 Knights received the bottle and casually thanked Han Shuo. Soon after, he bit off the cap of the crystal bottle and gulped down the healing potion within the crystal bottle. In an instant, a green radiance enveloped Reverse 16 Knights' right arm. Although there were still traces of blood, his injury was completely healed. Soon after, Wuming looked at Pest who was flying in the air. This is the second time we've met, right? This is the first time we've officially met, Pest. Wuming greeted Pest with the tone of an old friend. However, this only made Pest feel disgusted. Shut up. I don't want to hear your voice. Pest's expression was slightly malevolent as she glared at Wuming. Pest had long since noticed that the people trapped in Hamel had left the town. Although she did not know why, there was a high chance that it had something to do with Wuming. The departure of her companions and the fact that her plan had basically failed. Then, she saw the person with the sun in his body. This made Pest rather furious. If it wasn't for you, I would have already succeeded. Pest shouted somewhat hysterically. However, this was just self-deception. At least without me, your plan won't succeed. You know that, don't you? After witnessing Reverse 16 Knights and Kasuga Yari eliminate her subordinates and companions, Pest realized that these two possessed considerable strength. In addition, there were also Indra's subordinates here, as well as the leaders of Salamandra, Shadora and Letitia, who weren't here. If all of them joined hands, Pest really wasn't confident. Not to mention, what if there were other experts who weren't weak? One could only say that Pest did not gather enough information beforehand. Or perhaps, in short, Pest who had understood everything was merely self-deception, self-consolation, and venting the dissatisfaction in her heart. It's over, said Wuming indifferently. Truth be told, Wuming did not wish to attack Pest. Possessing the authority to take revenge on the sun meant that Pest had been abused by the sun. Because of that, Pest chose to become the Demon King. Demon Kings were loathsome, frightening, and hateful. However, there was a good saying. A hateful person would definitely have a pitiful side. That said, Wuming also knew this saying. A pitiful person would definitely have a hateful side. The reason why Wuming did not wish to attack Pest was because Pest had accepted Wuming's cotton candy back then. If Wuming wasn't here today, Pest's arrival would definitely result in casualties. Although Wuming should not continue to negotiate with such a wretched person, Wuming felt that a person who was interested in cotton candy, who accepted Wuming's cotton candy with the seemingly far-fetched reason of not wasting food, and who was enraged by the death of her companions, a person like this could still be saved. However, there was another saying. If the heavens want a person to die, they must first make him or her crazy. It's not over yet. Pest replied to Wuming furiously. As if responding to Pest's final words of madness, the glass paintings with the words Hamel's Pied Piper, in the town of Hamel all erupted with powerful power. The power condensed into black mist. Then, in merely an instant, the black mist condensed above Pest's head and turned into a large amount of black substance. Slowly, the black substance absorbed even more of the black mist and began to gradually grow in size. Although it appeared to be slow, in merely a few seconds, the black substance had grown to a size comparable to the entire town of Hamel. As for the glass paintings with the words Hamel's Pied Piper on them, they were all shattered. Regardless of whether it was Wuming, 16 Knights, Black Rabbit or Haruhabu Yai Chi, the four of them could clearly tell that this clump of black substance was no simple matter. It was no longer in existence on the same level as the black mist from before. If the clump of black substance above Pest's head were to smash down, the impact alone would be enough to shatter the entire town of Hamel. However, as Wuming was here, Black Rabbit and Haruhabu Yai Chi were not too worried. As for 16th Knights, he did not arrogantly say, "Leave it to me to deal with." After all, 16th Knights only possessed inhuman abilities in his body, fists, legs, and other aspects. Faced with such a large clump of unknown black substance, he did not think that his fists would be able to destroy it before it landed. As for Wuming, he would naturally be able to do it. However, Wuming did not intend to choose this path. Instead, he chose another path. Killing Pest would solve all his problems. Golden ripples spread out from Wuming's body. A white holy spear was automatically spat out from within. Then, a hand grasped the spear tightly. As the space within the dragon nest was fixed, no matter what state Wuming was in, as long as he could open the dragon nest, he would be able to take out the items within. As for these items, they were all genuine items that had accompanied Wuming in his adventures. The item that Wuming took out was the one that had accompanied him from the very beginning. It was a precious artifact that was given to him by his master and sister, Skaha. It was an artifact refined from a branch cut from the core of the Nordic world tree. At this moment, Wuming held the spear of the world tree in a reverse grip. He was in a throwing posture as he madly poured his magic power into the holy spear. Then, Wuming uttered the true name of the companion that had accompanied him for a long time and threw it out. Pest was unwilling to give up. Carrying the madness of perishing together with her, she charged down ferociously with the black substance above her head. Together with the holy spear, the holy light pierced toward Pest, who was charging over with the black substance. Then, the light covered 16th Knights, Black Rabbit, and Yao's eyes. Chapter 663. You really gave me a fright. The voice belonged to 16 Knights. Hearing 16 Knights' voice, Black Rabbit slowly opened his eyes that were shut due to the strong light. Then, Black Rabbit noticed that the scene before his eyes had changed. The scene before him was supposed to be Hamel Town with the moon hanging high in the sky. However, it was now the fire dragon birth ceremony with the sun hanging high in the sky. This. What's going on? Black Rabbit looked at 16 Knights and Kasuga Hibaku beside him in shock. Oh, right. Where's the Villo and Pest? Why are they gone? Black Rabbit asked anxiously. However, regardless of whether it was 16 Knights or Kasuga Hibaku, they had no time to answer Black Rabbit. Dong! Kasuga Hibaku leaped behind Black Rabbit. Then, He kicked a two-headed dragon lizard that looked like a lizard behind Black Rabbit and sent it flying. "Let's deal with the danger before us first, Black Rabbit." 16 Knights also sent the two-headed dragon lizard in front of him flying with a punch. He answered Black Rabbit excitedly without even turning his head. Black Rabbit was confused. He did not know what was going on. Aren't these the split bodies of absolute evil? Why would it appear here? The Black Rabbit let out a sorrowful cry. "Oh, looks like these guys aren't as simple as they seem." 16 Knights was slightly excited. How could this be? However, there was no time for Black Rabbit to complain. But don't think too much about it. They're coming. On the other side, Wuming was hovering in the sky above the fire dragon birth ceremony. At this moment, Wuming was holding a ball of black substance in his hand as he hovered in the air. Pest was killed by Wuming's relic. The explosion caused by the aftershock destroyed Hamiltown as well. The instant before Hamiltown exploded, Wuming activated the spatial art that he had carved on Black Rabbit, 16 Knights, and Yao and sent them out. This was why Black Rabbit and the other two discovered that they had returned to the fire dragon birth ceremony when they opened their eyes. White Yiksha aside, the spatial explosion was slightly dangerous for Black Rabbit and the other two. Oh, right. By the way, when Pest died, the curse on White Yiksha had disappeared. Thus, Wuming did not bother with White Yiksha. If a mere spatial explosion could kill White Yiksha, then Wuming would definitely find a piece of tofu to kill himself. The reason why Wuming didn't leave with Black Rabbit and the others was because of the black substance in Wuming's hand. This was a strand of energy that Wuming had intercepted before Pest disappeared. "We'll talk about it later." As Wuming spoke, he placed the energy he intercepted from Pest into the golden ripple that appeared beside Wuming. Then, the golden ripple closed. Wuming looked down. Sure enough, Pest is not the only guest here this time around. The reason why Wuming said this was because a large number of twin-headed lizards had appeared in the fire dragon birth ceremony. These twin-headed lizards that resembled dragons were constantly attacking the fire dragon birth ceremony. Now, a portion of the fire dragon birth ceremony had already turned into ruins. As for the people rescued by Wuming from Hamel, although there were many of them, they were all moved to one place by Wuming. Then, under the arrangements of Shadora and Mandela, Salamandra immediately evacuated these people. They completely withdrew from the fire dragon birth ceremony. That's right. When Wuming moved the majority of the people out of Hamel, Shadora, Mandela, and Salamandra's guards were all moved out together. Afterward, Shadora and Mandela discovered the twin-headed dragon's attack in time and protected democracy. Then, without even fighting, they directly withdrew from the fire dragon birth ceremony. Although ordinary people might not understand this action, some people who had lived long enough or had rich experiences understood that the enemy was not that simple. Why? Naturally, it was because of the twin-headed dragon's strength. These twin-headed dragons were not ordinary existences. They were all the splits of some ancient demon king. Among them, the strongest of the splits had god-level strength. Apart from that, these splits could split again through blood. In other words, they were existences that would increase in number the more they fought. Not to mention the number, just the fact that the strongest of the splits was a god-level existence was already enough to deal with. If Salamandra's members were to fight against the twin-headed dragon army, there was an 80 to 90% chance that Salamandra's members would be wiped out. That was because these twin-headed dragons were existences that ranked at the bottom of the 5 digits. What did a 5-digit number mean? Pest was a 5-digit number. Her all-out attack could kill most of the people in the fire dragon birth ceremony. It was that simple. Even if it was a 5-digit number, it was not something that Salamandra, who was in the middle or lower 5-digit number, could deal with. Furthermore, the fire dragon birth ceremony was held in a 7-digit number outer gate. Even if there were experts, they would not exceed the 5-digit number. Thus, Salamandra could only choose to have everyone retreat. However, retreating was just retreating. Those who were strong, such as Jiu Yu who had received a new gift, Aisha, and Jack who had been defeated by Hiroi Hikari, Shadora, who was the leader of Salamandra, as well as 16 knights, Black Rabbit and Hiroi Hikari, who had been accidentally teleported to the back of the twin-headed dragon by Silent Wonder, were engaged in a desperate battle with the twin-headed dragon. However, with so many twin-headed dragons, how could Salamandra possibly be able to hold them back with just these few people? The main reason was because Letitia was here. In the beginning, when Wuming teleported the majority of the people away, Wuming had also teleported Letitia. Because Wuming was afraid that someone would take the opportunity to attack the fire dragon birth ceremony outside while he was dealing with Pest in the town of Hamel, Wuming notified Letitia through the connection of his dependent incarnation. Letitia was naturally very obedient and was teleported outside by Wuming. Then, the twin-headed dragon army attacked. This was because Letitia notified Shadora and Mandela. After the two of them investigated the situation, they hurriedly evacuated the people at the fire dragon birth ceremony. After Letitia was teleported out by Wuming, she discovered the twin-headed dragon's whereabouts. After using her ability to notify Shadora, she pulled on her hair rope and transformed into her adult form. Then, Letitia started fighting the twin-headed dragons. Although some of the twin-headed dragons were very powerful and had reached the 5-digit number of deities, and some had even reached the 4-digit number, most of the twin-headed dragons were still very weak. They only had the strength of a 5-digit number deity. Therefore, Letitia was able to deal with them. Don't forget that Letitia was no longer an ordinary 4-digit number deity. She had become Wuming's dependent and had obtained an extraordinary power to protect her. Strictly speaking, in the fire dragon birth ceremony, apart from Wuming and White Yiksha, the most powerful person was Letitia. However, even if Letitia was no longer an ordinary 4-digit number, she was still unable to defeat the twin-headed dragon army. There was no other reason other than that these guys could split up. Chapter 664. Although he did not know why there were records, Wuming had learned about the origin of these two-headed dragons from the underground library of no name. They were the splits of the blood of the oldest demon king that had existed since the beginning of the Box Court. That demon king was called Az-Dakaha, and he was the most powerful evil god in the sect of fire. He was one of the oldest god slayers, and he was called absolute evil in the human's final trial. In the Box Court world, some demon kings did not fall because they abused their authority. Instead, they were born as demon kings. Az-Dakaha was such an existence. Because he was evil when he was born, he descended as a demon king. The reason why Az-Dakaha hadn't been seen all these years was because 200 years ago, it was led by the largest community in the East District. Together with the many top-level communities in the Box Court, Az-Dakaha was sealed away. That's right, it was no name that sealed Az-Dakaha 200 years ago. And Salamandra was also an ally community of no name at that time. Because of this, Salamandra chose to evacuate the crowd after knowing that the enemy was the two-headed dragon splits of the Demon King. They sent their elite forces to fight against these two-headed dragons. The reason why these two-headed dragons were so difficult to deal with was not because of their strength, but because they could split. This was Az-Dakaha's special characteristic. Its blood would give birth to Az-Dakaha splits. The first generation of two-headed dragons that were born from its blood had the strength of a god. These first generation would inherit Az-Dakaha's special characteristic, and their blood would give birth to splits. However, the second and third generation of two-headed dragons that were born later on would have their strength greatly weakened. However, the weakest of them would still have the strength of a 5-digit level. 200 years ago, in the battle against Az-Dakaha, Az-Dakaha had shed a lot of blood. That blood had split into these two-headed dragons and spread throughout the Box Court world. Even after 200 years of sealing Az-Dakaha, Box Ting still hadn't completely eliminated all of Az-Dakaha's doppelgangers. However, even if there was still a two-headed dragon in the courtyard, it couldn't have suddenly appeared here. One had to know that this was the boundary wall between the 3999999 outer sect and the 4000000 outer sect. Although it couldn't be considered as flourishing, it wasn't remote either. How could these two-headed dragons suddenly barge in? There was no doubt that someone was behind this. Don't tell me it's that Maxwell guy. The first person Wu Ming thought of was the man who had been killed by Wu Ming in an instant but had strangely resurrected and escaped using a spatial ability. There was no other reason, because among the group of forces that wanted to purchase Letitia, only this guy called Maxwell was slightly unfathomable to Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming didn't recognize all of the other parties' organizations. It might have been done by someone else. But all in all, it was better to get rid of the two-headed dragons first. Wu Ming stretched out his hand and golden ripples appeared, spitting out a slightly twisted scepter with 7 golden snake heads with different colored gems at the top. It was the scepter of Ains Vulgan that Wu Ming hadn't touched for a long time. It couldn't be helped, there was no chance to use it. The golden ripples disappeared, and Wu Ming held the scepter of Ains Vulgan in his hand and gently tapped the void with the tip of the scepter at the bottom. Ding! A strange sound came out, and at the same time, ripples appeared at the place where the scepter of Ains Vulgan had tapped. Wu Ming activated his own inherent enchantment, Nasalic's 6th layer. In an instant, Wu Ming stood on the spectator stand of the ancient Colosseum, and those who were fighting with the two-headed dragons, such as 16 Knights and Black Rabbit, also came to the position around Wu Ming in an instant. Master. As soon as Letitia saw Wu Ming, she immediately came to Wu Ming's side, put on her hair band, returned to her lowly form, and respectfully lowered her head. You've worked hard, Letitia. Wu Ming smiled and patted Letitia's little head. As expected, the lowly form was better. It's Letitia's honor, Master. Letitia replied to Wu Ming with a joyful face. It seemed that because of the dependent incarnation, Letitia was becoming more and more clingy to Wu Ming. Villo? Senior Letitia? What's going on? Black Rabbit exclaimed because of the shock. Don't worry, Black Rabbit, this is my home ground. Wu Ming said softly. Oh Colosseum, you have such a bad taste. 16 Knights commented as he looked around. I've already brought all the two-headed dragons here, don't worry, Wu Ming said as he pointed to the center of the Colosseum below. Countless two-headed dragons crowded the Colosseum and roared crazily as if they were trapped beasts about to meet their death. Logically speaking, the original Colosseum on the 6th floor of Nasalic shouldn't be able to fit these two-headed dragons, but because it was an inherent enchantment, and because Wu Ming used the staff of Anziergen to adjust the size of the Colosseum, it could fit them. The reason why Wu Ming was able to move all the two-headed dragons and 16 Knights into his inherent enchantment was because of Wu Ming's authority as the host. Wu Ming didn't say that he only set up a spatial tactic on the people, he also set up many tactics in the venue and space. Even if you have the authority as the host, don't lower your guard against these existences. Those are definitely the Demon King's clones. White Yiksha came to Wu Ming's side at some point and looked down solemnly. Due to the fact that Pest had been killed, the seal that bound White Yiksha had also been removed. White Yiksha naturally recognized the existence of these Demon King's clones and was about to attack in shock. In the end, she and the others were brought here along with all the attacking two-headed dragons. I naturally won't lower my guard, but since these guys have come here, they definitely have nowhere to run today. After Wu Ming finished speaking, Anziergen tapped the ground with the staff of Anziergen. In an instant, countless demon kings rushed toward the two-headed dragon army from the corners and entrances of the Colosseum. When the two-headed dragon army saw that there were living creatures, they immediately charged forward. In an instant, the monsters and the two-headed dragon army clashed. This shocking scene stunned Shadora, Aisha, Flying Bird, Yao, Black Rabbit, and the other women. Of course, White Yiksha was a 10,000-year-old lowly, so she wasn't considered a woman. Although Wu Ming's monster army was ferocious, the two-headed dragon army's strength was obvious. However, Wu Ming's monsters were endless. The two-headed dragon army could split up when it was injured, which led to a balanced situation at the moment. Do you need help, Villo Brat? White Yiksha saw that Wu Ming's monster army couldn't take down the two-headed dragons in a short time, and her restless heart started to jump. After all, she was aggrieved and could only move freely after Pest's death. The monsters I released are the magic projections of my inherent enchantment because you can attack them at will. This sentence made White Yiksha laugh. Then I won't hold back. Then, the sun appeared. Chapter 665. Everything was over. Whether it was the attacking Infernal King or the most ancient Infernal King's clone, all of them had been killed. Shadora, the leader of the hierarchy, personally announced that they had defeated the attacking Infernal King and had also eliminated the most ancient Infernal King, Absolute Evil's clone. This undoubtedly strengthened the people who were afraid of the Infernal King and made them extremely happy. Their trust in Shadora also greatly increased. This made Mandela heave a sigh of relief. After today, Shadora's prestige as the leader of the hierarchy had been raised to a stable level. Salamandra did not have to worry about this anymore. As for No Name, although the people did not see the Infernal King being defeated by No Name, when the Infernal King was defeated, they saw that Shadora, Mandela, and the others were not with the Infernal King. Other than Salamandra, only No Name, who was not weaker than a powerhouse like White Yiksha, could have done it. In addition to Salamandra's publicity, the people knew that No Name had defeated the Infernal King. In addition, White Yiksha had personally admitted that No Name was the one who had trapped the two-headed dragons. That was why she had been able to eliminate the two-headed dragons in one blow. This made No Name even more famous. As a result, No Name changed from a nameless 7-digit community in the East District whose purpose was to defeat the Infernal King, to a powerhouse who defeated the Infernal King. In this way, the reputation of No Name could be considered to have spread. More importantly, under the attack of the Infernal King and the god-level two-headed dragons, there were miraculously no deaths at the fire dragon birth ceremony. This undoubtedly made people very excited. After all, no matter which Infernal King attacked, it was impossible for there to be no casualties. Now, the people had something to brag about. For example, I experienced an Infernal King attack without any casualties, and so on. Of course, that was all in the future. After solving the problem of the Infernal King and the two-headed dragons, the fire dragon birth ceremony should continue. However, because the venue had been damaged a lot, the ceremony could not continue. As for the fire dragon's birth ceremony, it was only halfway done. Being unable to continue was undoubtedly a heart-wrenching matter. This was especially true for 16 Knights, Jo Yuasuke, and Hiroi Hikari. This was the first time they had seen such a grand ceremony in the Hakata world. Although it was interesting to face the Demon King, the fact that the ceremony couldn't continue made the three of them throw tantrums. However, White Yiksha stepped in to help. According to White Yiksha, she did not contribute much during the fire dragon birth ceremony and the Demon King's avatar's attack. Feeling apologetic, White Yiksha said that she would be responsible for repairing the damaged area of the ceremony. Although that was what he said, White Yiksha still borrowed the power of his community. After all, it would be a waste not to use it. After that, on the night of the Demon King's attack, this and Yes sent people to rush the repairs overnight. The next day, the entire venue was restored to its original state, as if nothing had happened. The fire dragon birth ceremony continued. In the various blessing competitions that were held after that, No Name, who had already made a name for themselves, became even more powerful. They participated in a large number of blessing competitions and won a large number of blessings. Even Ren released his servant, the demon star spirit Argel, which surprised Shadora and Mandela. All in all, No Name had earned a lot from this fire dragon's birth festival. A few days later, the fire dragon birth ceremony successfully ended. In front of Salamandra's temporary base during the fire dragon birth ceremony, Shadora and Mandela led Salamandra's group. In front of them were No Name and White Yiksha. Now that the fire dragon birth ceremony was over, it was time for White Yiksha to leave. As he wanted to try Wuming's teleportation portal, he chose to follow Wuming and the others back to the East District. I'm really grateful for everyone's help in this fire dragon's birth ceremony, Shadora said with deep emotions as she bowed to everyone. Mandela and the other members of Salamandra didn't say anything, but they followed Shadora and bowed to No Name and White Yiksha. Well, we've been slacking off, so there's no need to thank us. White Yiksha waved his hand. However, White Yiksha was a big shot after all, so he enjoyed Shadora's respect. How could that be, Lord White Yiksha? Without you, our Salamandra wouldn't have been able to hold the fire dragon birth ceremony alone. Shadora shook her head and refuted White Yiksha's words. Then, White Yiksha nodded shamelessly. This action made the 4 problem children look down on him. Then, as the leader of the community, Ren stepped forward and said some polite words. Thank you for your care, everyone from Salamandra. We, No Name, also benefited a lot from the fire dragon birth ceremony. Now that the fire dragon birth ceremony is over, we should take our leave. However, there was still a trace of unwillingness in Ren's eyes. He really wanted to restore his alliance with Salamandra. No, they had always been allies, so it should be said that Salamandra had to restore their alliance unilaterally. It wasn't because he wanted to ride on someone's coattails or take advantage of them. Ren simply wanted to recreate the past of No Name. After all, if he really wanted to ride on someone's coattails, it should be Salamandra riding on the coattails of No Name. From Ren's point of view, finding his companions was one thing, finding his former allies was another. Wuming, who was standing behind Ren, put his hand on Ren's shoulder. Ren turned his head and saw Wuming shaking his head slightly. No matter what, No Name shouldn't be the first to suggest a reconciliation. After all, Salamandra was the first to unilaterally abandon the alliance. Ren nodded slightly. Then, Ren looked at Shadora. Then, we'll take our leave. After Ren finished speaking, a dark purple teleportation door appeared behind No Name and White Yiksha. At this moment, Shadora spoke. Please wait. Everyone looked at Shadora and waited for her to speak. Then, Shadora looked at Mandela, who had closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and looked at No Name with an apologetic and sincere gaze. Everyone of No Name, I, as the leader of Salamandra, Shadora Teldarek, resubmit an alliance application to No Name. Shadora's words made Ren's eyes light up slightly. Ren looked around and looked at the other No Name members. Wuming, Letitia, Black Rabbit, 16 Knights in Reverse, Joyuan Flying Bird, Kasuga Biao, and Lily. Everyone nodded at Ren and looked at him with encouragement and trust. The leader of the No Name community, Ren Russell, accepts the application from Salamandra. Then, Shadora and Ren shook hands, which meant that the alliance between Salamandra and No Name was formed again. Chapter 666. No Name, Base, in a room. The dark purple portal opened and Wuming and the others walked out. The first to speak was Jiu Yuao. We're finally back, Jiu Yuao complained as she sat on the sofa and leaned her back against it with a face full of enjoyment. For the past 2 days, they had been staying at the venue of the fire dragon's birth ceremony. Although the facilities were generally good, it was not their home. In short, it was not a comfortable place to stay. Although they had not been in No Name for long, Jiu Yuao had already begun to treat this place as her home. Hiroi Hiroyuki was the same. She hugged Sanmao and sat beside Jiu Yuao, stroking Sanmao's fur with a satisfied expression. I'm satisfied, this time I had a lot of fun. 16 Knights stretched and then found a sofa to sit down. His mood was the same as the other 2 problem children. You 3 became decadent in an instant. Aren't you afraid of Black Rabbit's preaching? Wuming joked, but he also found a sofa to sit down like the 3 problem children. Letitia, on the other hand, followed Wuming closely, befitting her identity as a maid. However, in the face of Wuming's teasing, the 3 problem children showed an expression of victory. Then, as the representative, 16 Knights spoke. It's just Black Rabbit, it has already been bought over by our spoils of war. Saying this, Wuming could not help but look at Black Rabbit. At this moment, the Black Rabbit was hugging a gift card and giggling foolishly. Black Rabbit did not even resist when White Yiksha was taking advantage of it. Did you guys give all the prizes you won from the gift competition at the Fire Dragon's birth ceremony to Black Rabbit? That's right. The reason why Black Rabbit became like this was because 16 knights, Jiuyuao, and Hiroi Hiroyuki gave all the prizes they won from the gift competition to Black Rabbit. Of course. I don't need these things. Just take it as a favor. 16 Knights Reversal waved his hand naturally. Furthermore, this child's community has already given me the blessings I need. Other blessings are no longer of any use to me. Jiu Yufei said as he stroked the yellow elf that was lying on his leg. It's all thanks to you guys, Mir. By the way, Mir is the name I came up with for the child. Jiu Fei Miao said happily. The first half of the sentence was directed at Mir, while the second half was directed at the members of No Name. Mel. Mel. The yellow elf shouted happily. This little yellow fairy was the one that ancient flying bird had saved. Because Mir had sensed the danger, she lured the distant bird to the location of the greatest work of her community when the Demon King attacked. After passing the trial of the Mel community, Distant Bird successfully obtained a powerful gift that was suitable for him, might. By the way, this child's community was the souls of the 130 children that were born in Hamel and lured away by the Pied Piper. After reincarnating, they became a group of elves with achievements and spiritual attributes. As for Mir, it was because the 130 children's elves had increased their spiritual attributes during the reincarnation process. Because of this, Mir was able to act alone. However, after knowing that this child's community was Rattenfanger, Wuming sighed at how small the world was. Pest's community was Hamel, and Mir's community was the Rat Catcher. There was a lot of fate between them. I only want to make friends. These blessings are of no use to me. In the end, Hiroi Hiroyuki shook his head. Hearing the three problematic children's words, Wuming shrugged his shoulders. After all, he had given the reward from a Salamandra after defeating the Demon King to the Black Rabbit, who was the butler of No Name. At this time, Yiksha, who was quietly touching the Black Rabbit, made a strange sound. He Black Rabbit's chest, he slurp. After all, Black Rabbit wasn't really stupid. Because White Yiksha's movements were too big, he had already pulled Black Rabbit out of his beautiful fantasy about the future of No Name. Lord Yiksha. The Black Rabbit slapped Yiksha and sent him flying. Puff, seeing Yiksha flying towards him, Wuming shook his head helplessly. Then he reached out and grabbed Yiksha's head. Be gentle, boy. Yiksha suggested. You really don't learn to be obedient, Yiksha. Wuming helplessly put Yiksha on the ground. He. This is the true meaning of life. This is the great spirit of sacrificing oneself for art. Sure enough, Yiksha was also a problematic child, or it should be said that he was a problematic BBA. Then I'm sorry, I'm not 16 Knights in Reverse. Wuming shrugged his shoulders. Hey. What do you mean you're not 16 Knights in Reverse? I've already become a derogatory term, you bastard. Although his tone was rough, 16 Knights in Reverse still had a smile on his face. Shaking his head helplessly, Wuming stopped chatting with this group of problematic children. Run, Black Rabbit, Lily, let's go arrange these gifts that we won from the Fire Dragon's birth ceremony in the community. Wuming said and looked at Run, Black Rabbit, and Lily. Not only did the three problematic children give gifts, Ren also won a lot of more practical gifts. With these gifts, our No Name can be considered to have some assets. Black Rabbit hugged the gift card that stored the three problem children's contributions with a face full of happiness. As a moon rabbit whose motto was contribution, the Black Rabbit was extremely happy when she thought of contributing to the community. Although these bricks and tiles were not provided by her, it did not affect the Black Rabbit's mood. At this moment, Wuming suddenly froze. Villo? What's wrong? Ren looked at the stunned Wuming and asked in confusion. Then, Wuming looked at everyone seriously. Sorry, everyone, it seems that I have to leave for a while. So sudden? Black Rabbit was a little surprised. Did something happen? Jiuyuan Fei Niao asked with concern. do you need help? Haruhito Hikari asked with certainty, as if he would not allow Wu Ming to refuse. I will follow you, master. Letitia, who had been following behind Wu Ming without making a sound, spoke up. Letitia can, but I'm afraid the others can't, not even White Yiksha. Wu Ming shook his head. Wu Ming's words made everyone, including White Yiksha, frown. It seemed that Wu Ming's matter this time was not ordinary. Then, in the time you're not here, leave no name to us. 16 Knights Reversal suddenly jumped, came to Wu Ming's side, and patted him on the shoulder. With me here, you can rest assured. 16 Knights Reversal bared his teeth. Although I don't know what happened, we'll take care of no name, so you can rest assured. Ren, Black Rabbit, and Lily also nodded at Wu Ming. Seeing everyone's reaction, Wu Ming smiled. Then, I'll leave no name to you, my friends. Chapter 667. Inside the Root. The huge dragon body was sleeping soundly on the platform inside the Root, but the next moment, the dragon suddenly opened its eyes. The unique dragon aura of the Root dragon spread to the surroundings, causing some changes in the Root. You're back. Wu Ming said in a daze as if he had just woken up. After Wu Ming greeted the members of No Name, he brought Letitia back to his room. After telling Letitia a few things, Wu Ming dispelled his spiritual body in front of her. After all, Wu Ming had been using his spiritual body for all his actions in the box court world, so he could dispel it at any time. Of course, after Wu Ming dispelled his spiritual body, his spirit returned to the Root dragon's backup body inside the Root. Wu Ming had also tried to dispel his spiritual body and return to his body, but the result was obviously a failure. The outside of his body was still blocked by the Black Origin mud, so his spirit could not return unless Wu Ming saw his body. Helpless, Wu Ming could only return to the Root. However, one thing could be verified. Although the Demon King that attacked No Name stole Wu Ming's body, it did not affect Wu Ming's body at all. No, it should be said that it could not affect Wu Ming's body at all. Even Gidia had to rely on the self-destruction of the Black Origin mud to hurt Wu Ming, so how could a mere Demon King do anything to Wu Ming's body? After all, Kalas was also in Wu Ming's body. Therefore, Wu Ming was not in a hurry to find his body. The reason why Wu Ming told No Name that he would be leaving for a while was because Gadatsi had used a heroic spirit summon on Wu Ming. Wu Ming was stunned at that time because he felt Gadatsi's summon. The holy relic was undoubtedly the Holy Grail that had transformed into the Divine Blade of Salvation. However, Wu Ming didn't immediately respond to Gadatsi's summon because he needed to settle some matters here. As Wu Ming expected, Gadatsi should be at the 6th singularity. And now, Wu Ming was preparing to support Gadatsi and the others. However, Wu Ming remembered some information that Merlin had told Wu Ming when he was at the Uruk singularity. The 6th singularity was a little special. It was the singularity where King Arthur was located. In other words, we might meet Lily. On Wu Ming's huge dragon head, the pair of ruby-like dragon eyes flickered slightly. Although Wu Ming met Maeve first, strictly speaking, Artoria was Wu Ming's first love. However, because Artoria had to travel and fulfill her duties as a queen, Wu Ming didn't say anything and quietly became the king's knight. Because of Artoria's guilt towards Wu Ming, she deliberately transferred herself to Guinevere's side as Guinevere's personal guard. Did Wu Ming really not know what Artoria was thinking? It was nothing more than making up for what she owed him and Guinevere. After all, as a young girl, she couldn't satisfy her lover, and as a king, he couldn't satisfy his queen. Moreover, her lover and the queen were two people who liked each other. Wouldn't it be great to arrange them together? If Guinevere was pregnant, it would strengthen King Arthur's authority. After all, Artoria couldn't make Guinevere pregnant. Guinevere, who understood Artoria's thoughts, was happy to do so, but Wu Ming didn't take the initiative. In their opinion, Wu Ming was a stubborn person who wanted to be Artoria's knight. However, how could Wu Ming not see through Artoria and Guinevere's thoughts? He did it on purpose. It wasn't his style to be sneaky. If he wanted to do it, he would do it openly. Whether it was Artoria or Guinevere, Wu-ming wanted them all. Clenching fist, and this time, the singularity was an opportunity for him. However, before entering the singularity, Wu-ming needed to gather some information. Although it wasn't mature yet, Wu-ming could still get information about the singularity by using the Origin Dragon's ability. On Wu-ming's giant dragon head, the pair of ruby-like eyes were like a TV, projecting images. One moment, it was a desert, the next, it was a holy city, the next, it was a rugged mountain, and the next, it was a desolate wasteland. Wu-ming closed his eyes and opened them again. The scene in his eyes earlier was like an illusion. At this moment, it had disappeared without a trace. As expected, this singularity has a lot to do with Lily. Merlin, that bastard, he didn't explain it clearly. Wu-ming saw the nature of the singularity. The singularity wasn't caused by Gydia, but by Artoria. But this was also good. This singularity could be said to be without Gydia's interference, which made it easier for Wu-ming to act. However, it had been a long time, so he couldn't let his guard down. Dreams are beautiful, but reality is cruel. After becoming the Storm King, the undead king who walks the earth, and even the goddess, I'm afraid you have no human feelings anymore. Wu-ming's giant dragon head shook gently, as if denying Artoria's plan. It's not enough without a remonstrant. With that, Wu-ming slowly closed his eyes. The sixth singularity, on the ruins of the original Jerusalem, the new holy city stood there. In the palace, the Lion King, who rarely woke up from his sleep, came to the throne. Below him stood the Lion King's knights, the Knights of the Round Table. If Wu-ming was here, he would probably be surprised. These Knights of the Round Table were the knights in Wu-ming's memory, but this Lion King was different from the King Arthur in his memory. Compared to King Arthur, the Lion King was taller, had a more mature face, and a more mature chest. But even so, Wu-ming could still see that the current Lion King was the former King Arthur, Artoria. How is it? Haven't you found the whereabouts of the Villo? The Lion King's eyes exuded a holy light, and he asked the Knights of the Round Table below. The Black Knight's assistant, Agaroan, who was closest to the Lion King, took a step forward and respectfully bowed to the Lion King. I'm sorry, my king, but we still haven't found the whereabouts of the Villo. No wonder he was called Agaroan of Iron. His voice sounded as cold as steel. Hey, where did that guy go? He didn't even respond to the king's summons. That's annoying, Mordred said. He was wearing red armor, and he looked like a gangster. Agaroan frowned. He didn't know if it was because of Mordred's rude words or because Mordred was talking about the idol of the Knights of the Round Table. Gawain thought carefully about Mordred's words. Although there were only a few Knights of the Round Table between the thrones here, basically all of them had been summoned by the king's summons. They were not here because they had died on the battlefield, or were executed. It's not impossible that he wasn't summoned here. After all, bird, enough, Argyle of Iron interrupted Gawain. The Villo is not someone you can talk about. After Agaroan spoke, no one said anything. They quietly waited for the Lion King to speak. After a long time. Continue to look for the Villo. At the same time, continue the saint selection. If there's anything urgent, go to Guinevere. She will tell me. After that, the Lion King got up and left. Farewell, my king. Behind him, the Knights of the Round Table respectfully said. However, in a place where no one could see, the Lion King sighed slightly. Wu-ming. Chapter 668. The sun shone on the ground that seemed to have been burned by flames, and the surroundings were filled with a barren aura. The ground was barren, and there was no sign of life. Even the trees were only left with black branches that seemed to have been burned, giving people a feeling that they would break with a touch. The black branches were like forgotten people, quietly standing on this barren land. A few black figures wandered among them, hidden by the shadows of the forest formed by the black branches. Suddenly, a bright blue light lit up in the forest formed by the black branches, and a magic circle was automatically engraved on this barren land. The surrounding black figures slowly approached, and they could vaguely hear whispers that sounded like a spell. Show yourself, however, they, who were no longer afraid of death, began to slowly approach this strange magic circle that might bring them food. Suddenly, the magic circle was engraved, and the light shone brightly, causing the few black figures hidden in the shadows to groan in pain, and at the same time, their figures were exposed. They were zombie-like creatures, and their faces were so thin that they were almost distorted. Filth mixed with blood wrapped around their bodies, and the black, smelly, and tattered cloth covered their bodies that were already riddled with holes and were as thin as firewood, as if it would not be strange if they died in the next moment. They, who were used to living in the dark, had a strong resistance to the sudden bright light. As they retreated, they used their arms to cover their faces with difficulty, as if their filthy bodies were not qualified to be exposed to the light. A few seconds later, the bright light disappeared, and the few figures returned to the shadows. This made them quiet down, but they did not put down the arms that covered their faces, as if they were afraid that the light would come again in the next moment. The sound of steel entered the ears of these zombie-like black figures. No, it was not steel, it was boots, the boots that they were familiar with, the boots that were worn by noble knights, made of steel. The sound of footsteps stepping on the ground. The black figures removed their arms and looked at the figure that appeared from the lit magic circle. It was a bright silver figure, and the silver-white armor and helmet covered the person's entire body, looking very holy. Their helmets also had protrusions that resembled dragon horns. Because of the helmet, their faces could not be seen clearly. However, this did not hinder the black shadows from killing the person inside the armor. The sound of the boots hitting the ground had terrified the shadows. They had become like this because they were wearing such boots. However, it was precisely because the young man was one of the perpetrators that the black shadows were filled with killing intent. On one hand, they feared the newcomer, but on the other hand, they hated the newcomer. They, who no longer cared about death, began to approach this sacred yet hateful figure. Wu Ming opened his ruby-like eyes from within the armor. I'm not used to it. It had been a long time since Wu Ming looked through the helmet because his armor and helmet had long been lost in Camello. Whether it was the precious armor that he had given to Gadotsi in the America's Singularity, or the ordinary armor that he was wearing now that was condensed out of mana, it was not his real armor. After taking a deep breath, Wu Ming suddenly exhaled. It's the smell of burning. Wu Ming looked around. When he saw that the horizon in the distance was also burned, he was not surprised. Although Wu Ming had seen the barren land through his authority in the root, when he experienced it himself, Wu Ming's brows furrowed even more. What's wrong with this world? Wu Ming sighed. His words were filled with doubts about why the land had become like this, and also about the black shadows around him that were filled with killing intent and wanted to attack him. After Wu Ming appeared from the heroic spirit's summoning circle, he felt the killing intent around him. Maintaining the projection of his mental strength, he naturally saw the true faces of the surrounding black shadows that were filled with murderous intent towards him. They were humans, ordinary humans who had not died or been cursed. The reason why they had become zombie-like was because of hunger, Wu Ming guessed. Hunger had obliterated their human nature, leaving them with little appetite. Even their will to live had been obliterated. Because they had given up on struggling, they had no complaints even if they died now. To them, who were filled with fear of suicide, death was a release for them. There was no doubt that this was a contradiction. Wu Ming waved his hand, and a bright silver holy sword appeared from a golden ripple beside Wu Ming. Wu Ming grabbed the sword and pointed it downward. Then, he channeled his magic power and stabbed the ground. Boom, crack, a loud sound was heard. A small but deep fissure appeared on the ground. In the end, the black shadows who had not completely obliterated their will to live were terrified. It was not difficult for high-ranking knights to crack the ground with a single strike. However, not many people could create such a small but deep fissure like the one before them. They could not defeat such a knight. Otherwise, they would not have become like this. The black shadows wanted to retreat, but Wu Ming would not allow it. Crack, Wu Ming gently turned the meteor silver that was inserted into the ground. Two cracks split from the small fissure that had already appeared, extending in an arc to both sides. In just a moment, these two cracks each extended half an arc and finally overlapped, forming a circle. And the black shadows just happened to be inside this circle. The black shadows who were frightened turned around and wanted to escape. But the moment they moved, the ground formed by the fissure suddenly sank. Clearly, Wu Ming had already used his magic to dig out the ground below. Anyone who dared to move it would definitely cause the ground to sink. The black shadows were silent. They were already trapped here. If they were to face the Silver Knight behind them, there was no doubt that they would die. Roar! The black shadows let out a desperate roar. But because they had not spoken for a long time, their roar sounded like the roar of a beast. Facing these zombie-like humans, Wu Ming did not use his sword. Instead, he sighed and shook his head. Then, he suddenly released his magic power. Boom! The magic power that was visible to the naked eye directly shook the black shadows that attacked Wu Ming. The black shadows were sent flying to the ground. Due to Silent Cry's deliberate actions, the black shadows were not injured. They were only sent flying. Looking at these black shadows extending toward him, Wu Ming felt despair and resentment. If Wu Ming was their enemy, it would be understandable to have such a degree of resentment. But Wu Ming had just arrived, so how could he be their enemy? In other words, these people regarded Wu Ming as their enemy. No, if they had an enemy, then they would definitely not be able to survive. In other words, they regarded him as the person who persecuted them. Wu Ming frowned. Then, Wu Ming looked at these humans. Tell me the information, and I will give you food. The black shadows were stunned. After a few seconds, they nodded in unison. Chapter 669. Logically speaking, Wu Ming shouldn't have any food, because the current Wu Ming basically didn't need to eat. Even if he needed to eat, Wu Ming could get the ingredients on the spot, so there was no need to store food at all. But because Wu Ming had a contract with Olga Marie, Wu Ming emptied a store in the burning Winterwood City because of Olga Marie. Although some of the food was consumed in the Winterwood City, there was still a lot left, so Wu Ming took it out and gave it to the refugees who were still considered human for the time being. At that time, Wu Ming only took some packaged food that could be stored for a long time, but for the refugees, as long as it was edible, they were already satisfied. In the end, Wu Ming got the information that the refugees were given food and water and staggered away. Wu Ming didn't say anything about saving them, because the hearts of these refugees were almost dead. Wu Ming had a way to save their bodies, but there was no way to save their hearts. And once their hearts were alive, then there was no need for Wu Ming to save them. So Wu Ming just gave them food and water, and a few words of advice, and let them leave. Wu Ming still remembered that when Wu Ming gave the refugees food, their eyes revealed a look of disbelief. Maybe in their eyes, Wu Ming just wanted to get some information and then kill them all. Because many of their companions were killed by the knights. The desire to live stimulated them, making them know that they would die later, but they still hoped to die later. So they told Wu Ming the information he wanted to know. But Wu Ming gave them food and water in the end. However, Wu Ming felt that the refugees were surprised by his identity, the questions, information, and the food and water he gave out. These things were incompatible with this era, and they were filled with a strange aura. After all, I'm not from this era. Shrugging his shoulders, Wu Ming no longer thought about the refugees. Instead, he reflected on the information they provided to Wu Ming. According to the refugees' intelligence, the Crusaders had obtained great strength and were constantly advancing towards the Holy Land of Jerusalem. Then, just as they were about to conquer Jerusalem, a desert suddenly appeared in the west, and the Crusaders suddenly weakened. Then, the Crusaders were chased down by the people of the Holy Land. This was undoubtedly good news for the refugees. At that time, a strong man who called himself the Lionheart King Charlie I suddenly appeared. With unprecedented strength, he annexed the original Crusader army and the Holy Land of Jerusalem in one fell swoop, directly unifying the other areas except for the desert in the west. However, Charles I, who was known as the Lionheart King, was more like a devil than a human. A devil that caused the surrounding residents to fear. Whether it was the unimaginable tyranny or the cruel means of toying with people's hearts, the residents suffered greatly. Although there were some who tried to resist, they failed in an instant. According to the refugee, he was fortunate enough to see the Lionheart King once. The Lionheart King's entire body was emitting a dark aura. Just one look at him was enough to make people feel despair. The refugees could only use 2 words to describe him: demon. Wu Ming could undoubtedly judge that the man who called himself the Lionheart King Charlie was a servant. However, this was completely different from the character of Charlie I that Wu Ming knew from history. Could it be that a servant with the chaos evil attribute had impersonated Charlie the First? Wu Ming had such doubts at that time. However, Wu Ming didn't have to continue to think about it, because the refugees told him that the Lionheart King Charlie was defeated. The strong man called the Lion King led the existence of the Knights of the Round Table. After a hard battle, they defeated the Lionheart King Charlie I, who was comparable to the demon, and ended the terrifying tyranny of the Lionheart King in a very short time. However, the rule of the Lionheart King who replaced the Lionheart King was not any better than the Lionheart King. The Lionheart King built a new holy city, Camelot, on the battered holy city of Jerusalem, and then drove out all the residents and completely blocked Camelot. And announced to the public that the holy selection would be held regularly, and the selected people would enter the holy city and start a carefree life. And these refugees who wandered in the wasteland and became inhuman did not participate in the holy selection because the people who went to participate in the holy selection did not come back. There were a lot of people who went to participate in the holy selection. Although the refugees did not know the specific number, they knew that the holy city could not accommodate so many people. But none of those people came back. Thinking of this, Wu Ming sighed. Were they killed? After all, the people who went did not come back, and the holy city could not accommodate so many people. The only possibility was that they were massacred. Wu Ming's first reaction was disbelief, and then he began to have doubts. Merlin told Wu Ming that the Lion King was undoubtedly King Arthur Artoria, and the Knights of the Round Table were probably those people that Wu Ming was familiar with. If it was them, they would not have massacred, but if those people were not King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table that Wu Ming was familiar with, then it was not impossible for them to massacre the people who participated in the holy selection. The suspected servant named Lionheart was different from the original Lionheart, and it was hard to guarantee that King Arthur would not change. No, it should be said that there was already a change, otherwise, why would he call himself the Lion King and not King Arthur? All in all, he still needed to investigate. Apart from this, the refugees had no other information. Wu Ming did not suspect that the refugees were hiding anything. Their eyes had already told Wu Ming that they had told him everything they knew. Moreover, even though these refugees were locals, they were still narrow-minded. Do you expect ordinary farmers to know state secrets? It was obviously unrealistic. So, not only did Wu Ming need to find out about the Lion King, but he also needed to investigate the other forces, and most importantly, Wu Ming needed to find Gadotzi. After all, Wu Ming's main purpose was to help Gadotzi repair the singularity. Because Gadotzi had tried to summon Wu Ming was sure that Gadotzi and the others were in the singularity, but the specific location was difficult to find. Because of the incomplete authority link, Wu Ming could not search for too much information in the root. If he could achieve omniscience, then he was not far away from authority, and Wu Ming did not need to come here in person. He could have removed the singularity from the root. If he could do that, a mere Gidea would not be a problem. Shaking his head, Wu Ming threw the unrealistic thought out of his mind. Then, Wu Ming looked at the desert in the west, and then Wu Ming looked at the holy city in the east. Then, Wu Ming stepped forward and headed toward his chosen destination. Chapter 670. Wu Ming chose the direction of the east, and he decided to go directly to the Lion King. The biggest reason why he didn't go to the desert in the west was still unknown. Through the information provided by the refugees, Wu Ming could infer a lot of things. The Holy Grail was held by the Crusaders at the beginning, which was consistent with, they suddenly gained great power. Because they were not satisfied with their current power, the Crusaders made a gamble. They summoned a powerful servant. In the end, they lost the bet and lost everything. The servant betrayed them, and after snatching the Holy Grail, he summoned the entire desert here. After that, as the refugees said before, the Crusaders suddenly became weak, and then they were chased by the people of the Holy Land. Without the power of the Holy Grail, the Crusaders who couldn't beat Jerusalem became a paper tiger. After that, because the Holy Grail was in this era, some servants were summoned one after another. The Lionheart King Charlie was likely to be one of the servants summoned by nature. Due to an unknown secret, the Lionheart King did not become a brutal demon dweller like what was recorded in the history books. He annexed the Crusaders and the Holy Land, and fought against the servant in the desert. However, at this time, the Holy Grail summoned a new servant, the Lion King. The Lion King led the Knights of the Round Table to defeat the Lionheart King Charlie. The Lion King built a new holy city, Camelot, on the holy city of Jerusalem, which was affected by the attack on the Lionheart King and turned into ruins. The situation became like this now: the Lion King and the desert powerhouse were at the bottom of the pit. In Wu Ming's view, the servant summoned by the Crusaders was a pharaoh. Wu Ming could feel that the desert in the west was similar to the existence of an inherent enchantment, plus the ability to summon the entire desert was comparable to an inherent enchantment. Except for the pharaoh in Egypt, Wu Ming really couldn't think of anyone else who could have such an abnormal ability. After all, the pharaoh in Egypt was said to be a god. As a servant, the pharaoh was likely to be deified by this legend and have great power. The other party's information was completely unknown, and because of the enchantment, even if Wu Ming entered the desert, he could not effectively find Gadotsi. In short, Wu Ming was not prepared to get into trouble before he figured out who the owner of the desert was. Therefore, Wu Ming only had one choice left, and that was to go to the Lion King's side. Through Wu Ming's authority in the root, he knew that the singularity was on the verge of collapsing. If he continued to walk in a certain direction, he would find that there was no path left. This singularity was starting to break away from the timeline. It was like the singularity of the American continent. Beyond the singularity was a void. However, the final outcome of this singularity could be even worse. Compared to the American continent, which would become a new space independent of the timeline, this singularity would eventually collapse completely. The reason why the collapse of the human race in this singularity was so severe was actually because of the desert and the new holy city. The desert had the same effect as the fixed boundary. The fixed boundary interfered with the real world with a time limit, while the desert interfered with the real world without a time limit. The interference with the world had accelerated the collapse of the singularity. But even so, the singularity shouldn't have collapsed to this extent. So, the only reason left was the Lion King. Although Wu Ming did not get much information from the root, the collapse of the singularity still pointed to the Lion King. If I want to save this singularity, Tachika and the others will definitely go there. After all, if he wanted to restore humanity, he had to defeat the culprit who destroyed humanity. And now, the Lion King was the culprit. So, Wu Ming decided to wait for Gadotsi to arrive at the Lion King's side. At the same time, Wu Ming could also go and see what had happened to Artoria. Wu Ming took off his magical armor and put on a tattered cloak that he created using a high-tier item. Because the armor was not a noble artifact, it was dispensable to Wu Ming. So, Wu Ming cancelled the armor. And this way, he could also hide Wu Ming's identity as a Knight of the Round Table. Based on how the refugees treated the Knights of the Round Table, Wu Ming did not think that the Knights of the Round Table were very popular here. Just like that, Wu Ming pretended to be a refugee who wanted to go to the new holy city for the Holy Ascension. Stepping on the ground, Wu Ming walked toward the holy city step by step. However, the scenery along the way made Wu Ming frown. Along the way, although the surroundings were not as deserted as the place where Wu Ming had just arrived, the land that Wu Ming saw along the way was not much better. As if it had experienced a natural disaster, many places on the ground were cracked. The lack of water made Wu Ming unable to see any flowers or trees at all, except for a large piece of bare land. Wu Ming occasionally came across places that looked like villages, but there were still no signs of life there, which disappointed Wu Ming. None of the simple mud houses were intact. Basically, they were all so damaged that they were uninhabitable. There were no traces of human habitation around these houses. It was as if they had been abandoned for 100 years. There were some villages that seemed to have only been abandoned for a short period of time, but there were still no signs of life. I hope it's just my bad luck. Wuming comforted himself. Wuming felt uneasy that he could not meet anyone. If the humans in this singularity disappeared, it basically meant that there was no hope. The reason why Chaldea could save humanity, apart from Chaldea's uniqueness, was that there were humans in the singularity. It was because of such a small spark that Chaldea could turn this small spark into a big fire and finally let the fire of humanity envelop the entire earth. Apart from the humans, at the beginning, Wuming didn't encounter any other living beings along the way. He didn't even see any living plants. Wuming did encounter a lot of monster-like beasts, but when they attacked Wuming, they were all killed by Wuming. Other than that, Wuming also found some mysterious craters. The craters were of different sizes. The largest had a diameter of a few kilometers, and the smallest had a diameter of tens of meters. These craters looked like meteorite craters, and there were traces of burns left behind. But how could there be so many meteorites falling? Standing at the edge of a crater, Wuming half-squatted and touched the ground of the crater. If it's Lily, she really does have a relic that can create such a crater, the legendary weapon, the anchor that connected the two sides of the world, the Holy Lance Lungominiad. If it had been a legendary weapon, it would have been possible to create so many holes of different sizes. But why would Lily use the Holy Lance so often? Wuming wondered. Could it be that Artoria wanted to loosen the soil? How could that be? Wait. Wuming suddenly thought of an unbelievable idea. Then, Wuming ignored his hiding and flew up into the sky. Wuming flew to a high altitude and looked down. Then, Wuming's face changed. Chapter 671. Wuming landed from the sky with a gloomy face. His guess was right again. The giant pits of a few kilometers in size were distributed irregularly. In Wuming's view, it was likely that Artoria used the Holy Lance on Lionheart's troops. This was not a big problem, but the other pits that were not too big were quite big problems. Wuming looked down from the sky. The positions of these giant pits were suitable for building villages, and the size was completely suitable. So, the predecessor of these giant pits was a village distributed on this land. Because the Holy Lance continued to destroy the villages, the villagers who were lucky enough to survive had nowhere to go. They could only wander around, or go to the new holy city to participate in the holy selection to see if they could enter the holy city to live a good life. What? Why would the villagers go to the forces that destroyed their homes? Wasn't this obvious? Because the villagers who survived did not know the people who destroyed their homes in the new holy city. The light beam that destroyed the villages was probably just regarded as divine punishment. However, Wuming also encountered a lot of villages that had just begun to be abandoned. Why would these villagers abandon their villages and leave? Was it because there was no food, or because they were afraid of divine punishment, or because they were forced to leave? I lack information. Wuming shook his head. However, the limited information made Wuming understand why he could never meet humans. Although Wuming had previously guessed that the villagers on this land were eaten by the wild beasts that were quite powerful for ordinary people, this guess was now overturned. Camelot became the holy city, King Arthur became the Lion King. What happened in the end? What changed? Wuming looked in the direction of the holy city uneasily. After that, Wuming continued to move and set off in the direction of the holy city. Wuming found that the closer he got to the holy city, the fewer beasts he encountered before. Wuming even encountered a team of patrolling knights. Looking at the equipment of the knights, it was somewhat similar to the Knights of Camelot, but Wuming did not think that they were the Knights of Camelot. They were the Knights of the new holy city, Camelot, not the Camelot city of Great Britain Island. However, because Wuming hid, he was not discovered by the knights. Wuming was now more and more suspicious of the new holy city, so he decided to hide and see the situation first. After taking a slightly longer detour, Wu Ming disguised himself as a traveler who had come from a faraway place and was disturbed by the chaos of war. Because of the detour, Wu Ming was lucky to encounter a few humans. Fortunately, those humans also encountered Wu Ming. This was because they had encountered many strange beasts and monsters that Wu Ming had killed before. Wu Ming lent a helping hand and struggled to take care of the beast. In the end, he pretended to be seriously injured. He wanted to see if these humans still had hearts. Once again, it was fortunate that although these humans looked extremely thin and battered, they still retained their hearts. These humans were grateful to Wu Ming. After that, they said that they wanted to go to the holy city. If Wu Ming was willing, they could take care of the injured Wu Ming. Therefore, Wu Ming gladly joined the team. Wu Ming chatted with the leader of these people. The leader was constantly grateful to Wu Ming. After all, if it were not for Wu Ming, they would have been killed by the Soul Eater beast. The Soul Eater beast referred to the monster that Wu Ming killed. Such a monster was said to be the emissary of hell. It would kill humans and eat their souls, so it was called the Soul Eater beast. However, the Soul Eater beast was only a type of creature that was passed down in this area. Such a monster had never appeared before. After the strange creature that Wu Ming killed appeared, it was treated as a Soul Eater beast. However, when Wu Ming said something like, "Aren't you afraid of being eaten?" the humans looked helpless. If it weren't for the fact that we can't survive, who would go to the holy city to participate in the saint selection? Being eaten or starving to death made no difference to them. It seemed that they also knew that those who went to participate in the saint selection did not return. It was precisely because they could not survive that they accepted dying on the way. They only went to the saint selection to try their luck. After all, they would starve to death if they did not gamble. As they gradually approached the holy city, Wu Ming and the others did not encounter any danger. However, Wu Ming obtained some information from the leader of these people. In the mountains of the distant north, the assassin order called the Old Man of the Mountain was still active. Wu Ming, who was familiar with the Holy Grail War, naturally knew of the existence of the Old Man of the Mountain because the assassin of the 7 classes in the Holy Grail War referred to the Old Man of the Mountain, Hassan Sabah. Normally, as long as the assassin class was summoned, the possibility of summoning Hassan was 99%. Because Hassan and the assassin class had a lot to do with each other, the name of this class was equivalent to a holy relic. Therefore, if one wanted to summon an assassin that was not Hassan, one could only use a special holy relic or method to do so. If one were to look at it from a normal perspective, Hassan was actually very strong. As for the organization of the Old Man of the Mountain, their leader of each generation was called Hassan Sabah. The Hassans shaved their faces and wore bone masks to hide their true identities. Each generation of Hassan mastered a skill that others could not imitate or learn. In the eyes of ordinary people and even magicians, they were extremely dangerous existences. However, the dangerous existences to humans were in an awkward position in the Holy Grail War. Because of their low basic ability value, the Hassans could hardly fight head-on with the other 6 classes. They could only rely on sneak attacks to their masters. Of course, because the Hassans had all kinds of strange noble phantoms, they were not completely defeated. After all, the noble phantoms were miraculous things that could turn the tide of defeat. Just like the assassin class card that Wu Ming once used, because the assassin class card stored the spiritual base of the 19th generation Hassan, different Hassan abilities would be obtained after using it according to different users. The Hassan that Wu Ming used was the 19th generation cursed wrist Hassan. One of his arms was the arm of the demon god, which was the arm of the curse that could crush people's hearts. Even if it was a servant, if they were accidentally hit by this attack, they would have to leave the stage. Anyway, all in all, Wu Ming obtained a piece of information. There was a suspected assassin order in the northern mountains, which was the Old Man of the Mountain, Hassan Sabah. In this way, it could be regarded as a tripartite balance of forces. While thinking, Wu Ming found that they had arrived at their scheduled destination, the new holy city of Camelot. Chapter 672. A small number of refugees gathered in the open space in front of the holy city gate. There were about 100 or 200 of them. Among these 200 people, some of them had thin cloth placed beside them. Those were their beds. It seemed that many people had arrived here in advance, and it seemed that they had been living here for a long time. Fortunately, this place had become a singularity, and it was not so cold at night. Otherwise, these people would have frozen to death with just the thin cloth. However, Wuming was now thinking about one thing. Was he going to freeze here too? However, the heavens once again favored Wuming. The gate of the holy city opened. It seemed that Wuming had just arrived at the beginning of the holy ascension. The ability to double his luck in an instant was not for show. Seeing the gate of the holy city open, the refugees who had been waiting for a long time gathered together. Even the refugees who came with Wuming could not suppress the excitement in their hearts at this moment. They staggered into the crowd. Wuming naturally had to act more realistic, so he quickly walked toward the refugees. Immediately afterward, Wuming looked at the open gate of the holy city. A golden-haired man wearing pure white armor with a sword hanging from his waist walked out with a team of fully armed knights. The sword on the man's waist gave people the feeling of facing the sun. However, this comparison was correct because the sacred sword was the sister sword of King Arthur's sacred sword, Excalibur. It was called the Excalibur Victory Sword. The golden-haired man was none other than Gawain, the man who held the sword and was known as the Sun Knight. Wuming sighed. He had to admit that he could not greet an old friend he had not seen for a long time, and they might even become enemies in the future. Wuming once again felt helpless. Although becoming a servant gave heroes a chance to make up for their regrets, it was more of a helplessness brought about by the encounter across the timeline. Gawain, who had become a Lion King Knight, was no longer the noble Sun Knight. Wuming guessed that the disappearance of the refugees who came to the holy city for the holy ascension was related to Gawain. However, Gawain's next words confirmed Wuming's suspicions. Everyone, I, Gawain, will still be conducting the saint uplifting ceremony this time. Everyone, please settle down. Next, I will explain the things you need to take note of during the saint uplifting ceremony. Gawain waved his hand, and the knights standing behind Gawain began to move. In just a few seconds, the knights had surrounded Wuming's group of refugees. It looked like they were about to perform an important ceremony. However, this scene made Wuming frown involuntarily. In this way, if these knights wanted to do anything to these refugees, these unarmed refugees who were in a sorry state due to their haste to travel would become fish on the chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. When the saint uplifting ceremony begins, the tallest tower in the holy city will emit holy light. At that time, the bodies of the selected people will glow. These selected people have the purest hearts. Next, they will have the right to enter the holy city and live a carefree life. As for those who are not selected, their impure hearts will make them lose the right to enter the holy city. That's the rule. Do you all understand? Although Gawain's last sentence was a question, the refugees did not make a sound, or rather, they did not dare to make a sound. And Gawain seemed to be familiar with the refugees' behavior of not daring to speak, so the question he asked just now was just a routine. Next, it was time for the saint uplifting ceremony. The saint uplifting ceremony begins. At Gawain's command, the tower in the center of the holy city of Camelot emitted a light. This light made him look like a laser. He instantly arrived at the entrance of the holy city and shone on the refugees. The sudden change caused a commotion among the refugees. They began to check in a panic to see if their bodies were glowing, to see if they had obtained the right to enter the holy city and start a new life. However, most people's bodies were not glowing. There was not even the slightest change. However, most people discovered that there were only 3 or 4 people whose bodies were glowing. This frightened the refugees. There were so many of them, but only 3 or 4 of them were qualified to enter the holy city. Wasn't this saying that they were all dirty people on the inside? Those who had done many bad things frowned in dissatisfaction. When they heard that only those with pure hearts were qualified to enter the holy city, they no longer held any hope. They just wanted to try their luck. As for those who had not done any bad things and thought that they were pure but were not selected, they were devastated. This was the same as saying, you think you're a god, but in fact, you're not even a fart. It made people feel helpless, sad. However, Gawain did not show any surprise when he saw that there were only 3 or 4 people whose bodies were glowing. It was as if this was the number of people selected in each saint uplifting ceremony. Next, those who were not selected would be left to them to deal with. On Wu Ming's side, he was wearing a shabby cloak. His whole body was glowing, and he kept a distance from the people around him. However, Wu Ming was clearly not a human. He was clearly a ghost-like follower. How could he be selected? The mandatory condition to be selected by the light was that he was a human. In fact, when he saw the light emitted from the top of the tower, Wu Ming secretly used some means and tricks to capture part of the light. As Wu Ming expected, the light was emitted by the holy spear. Wu Ming's current spiritual base was indeed unable to face the holy spear head-on. However, Wu Ming still had a way to steal the light from those with pure hearts. It was because of this that Wu Ming's ghost was qualified to enter the holy city. The people around Wu Ming isolated Wu Ming. That was not Wu Ming's doing. After all, Wu Ming had to enter the holy city. It would be great if he could enter without causing a commotion. Therefore, Wu Ming did not need to make himself so conspicuous. The people around him only subconsciously distanced themselves from Wu Ming when they saw Wu Ming's body glowing. The selected Wu Ming was no longer like them. He was no longer a human like them. He was a real human. Therefore, the people around him subconsciously distanced themselves from that alien. The other selected people whose bodies began to glow were the same. The people around them subconsciously distanced themselves from them. It was also because the other selected people had the same experience as Wu Ming that Wu Ming did not do anything out of line. Unlike Wu Ming, who was unusually calm, the people who were alienated all looked uneasy and nervous. At this moment, Gawain spoke. Congratulations, you've been selected. You have the right to enter the holy city and start a new life. Then, Gawain opened up a path and pointed at the door behind him. Now, you may enter. However, the selected people, including Wu Ming, did not move. Or rather, other than Wu Ming, they did not know what to do. Gawain did not mind and waited quietly. Then, one of the selected people spoke. Can't I enter with my family? However, Gawain's reply was a cruel Gawain. Unfortunately, you can't. Chapter 673. Those who aren't chosen aren't qualified to enter the holy city. Also, as you can see, your family left you when you were chosen. You don't have to think about them at all. Go to the holy city and live the happy life you deserve, Gao Wenshao explained to the person who asked the question with both reason and emotion. However, that person still couldn't bear it and couldn't make a decision. On the other hand, the other people who were chosen didn't hesitate and strode toward the gate of the holy city. Wu Ming looked at the person who was still hesitating with interest. This person was the leader, who had accompanied Wu Ming all the way here and talked to Wu Ming. His family, who were the people who came with Wu Ming, lowered their heads and didn't dare to look at their chosen relative. These people felt guilty because they subconsciously retreated just now. After hesitating for a while, the chosen person sighed helplessly and walked toward the gate of the holy city. Finally, Gawain looked at the last chosen person who didn't move. It was Wu Ming, who was wearing a tattered cloak and whose face couldn't be seen clearly. Then, why don't you go in? Gawain asked. Upon hearing Gawain's words, Wu Ming walked toward Gawain step by step. When the surrounding refugees saw Wu Ming walking toward Gawain, they consciously made way for him. Gawain didn't stop Wu Ming in any way. The chosen people were precious, and they were all worth waiting for. In the end, Wu Ming came in front of Gawain, while the refugees came behind Wu Ming. I have a question, Wu Ming said to Gawain in a slightly different voice. Gawain frowned. He listened to this person's voice and looked at this figure. He felt that this person was somewhat familiar. Please speak. However, no matter what, this person was a chosen person with a pure heart. Even Gawain, who had become extremely dirty now, wouldn't ignore the voices of these pure hearts just because his body and soul were impure. This was because all of this was the king's orders. If I go in, what will happen to the rest of the people? Wu Ming finally asked the crucial question. Gawain frowned and said helplessly, the knights will be killed. The Knights of Solemnity will kill them all. The Knights of Solemnity were referring to the fully armed knights who had surrounded the refugees. Even that a filthy Gawain was still an upright knight. He would never lie. However, Gawain's words caused a huge uproar among the refugees. However, Gawain worried that his honesty would change the fate of the refugees because these sinners would never leave this place alive. After the holy purification, those who weren't chosen were sinners. Gawain's orders, and he only had to carry out the orders. Why? Wu Ming continued asking. However, this time, Wu Ming used his own voice. WH. Are you finally responding to the king's order? Gawain was taken aback. He hurriedly performed a knight's salute to Wu Ming. This left the Knights of Solemnity at a loss. They didn't understand why Sir Gawain was so respectful to this person. Although the chosen ones were worthy of respect, there was no need to be so respectful. The refugees were also interested in Wu Ming, who was suddenly respected by Gawain. However, it seemed like they should be thinking about how to escape from the encirclement of the Knights of Solemnity. After all, to these sinners, staying alive was the most important thing. I'm not responding to the king. I'm responding to the fated one of the heroic spirits, the last master of mankind, Tachika Fujimaru of Chaldea. Wu Ming calmly retorted Gawain. Then, are you also preparing to rebel against the king, Sir Villo? Gawain's tone was still very respectful even though he was questioning Gawain. The word also made Wu Ming frown. It seemed like there was an unknown past behind this. However, Wu Ming didn't answer his question. Let's make a bet, Gawain, Wu Ming said with a smile. If I win, I'll let them leave. If I lose, I'll kill them with my own hands. Then, I'll follow you to meet the king and pledge my loyalty to her again. Gawain straightened his body and looked at Wu Ming with an "I'm very upright" expression. You know, Sir Villo. Knights don't gamble. However, back in Camelot, whenever Wu Ming wanted to make a bet with someone for fun, Gawain would always look eager to try. But in order to get you back on the right path, I'm willing to make a bet with you. Gawain looked like he was going to die a martyr's death. This moved the knights, who didn't know what was going on. However, these knights probably didn't even know what the bet was. However, Wu Ming smiled proudly. Aren't you going to ask me what the bet is, Gawain? For the king, no matter what you want to bet with me, I'll agree to it. Gawain shook his head. Good. Wu Ming yelled. Then, he grabbed the corner of his cloak and pulled. Apart from the helmet, a fully armed silver dragon knight with a red cloak appeared in front of Gawain. It's great to see you again, Sir Villo. Seeing Wu Ming's familiar face, Gawain gave him a heartfelt blessing. However, Wu Ming ignored Gawain's greeting. Instead, he pointed at the refugees behind him. In that case, let them go. Wu Ming's words confused Gawain. Didn't he say that he would only let them go if he lost the bet? Why did he suddenly ask him to let them go? I bet on whether you would agree to the bet, and I won, Wu Ming said shamelessly to Gawain. This. Gawain was speechless for a moment. However, he had forgotten that back in Camelot, as a knight, silent cry was good at everything, but sometimes he would act a little shamelessly, especially when he made a bet with others, and it was the kind that made people unable to refute. Gawain indeed didn't ask what the bet was, and he even said that as long as Wu Ming proposed it, he would agree to the bet. In the end, who would have thought that Wu Ming and Gawain would bet on whether Gawain would accept Wu Ming's bet, as expected of you, Sir Villo. You did win, but, however, before Gawain could finish, Wu Ming interrupted him. This is a bet with my king. Don't tell me you want to go back on your word, Gawain. You're right. Let them go. Gawain smiled helplessly, then gave the order to the Knights of Solemnity. Although the Knights of Solemnity were a little confused, they were very obedient as they strictly adhered to the Knights' principles. Therefore, the Knights opened up a gap for the refugees to leave. When the refugees saw the hope of survival, how could they care about anything else? They scrambled and crawled away through the gap. Did you see that, Sir Villo? They didn't even say a word of thanks to you. Are these sinners worth saving? However, Wu-Ming nodded. Yes. Chapter 674. In the beginning, Wu-Ming's goal was to help Gadotsi save the singularity. But when Wu-Ming learned that the Lion King in this singularity was no longer the Artoria he knew, Wu-Ming decided that he must come and see what happened to Artoria. The reason why Wu-Ming captured the beam of holy selection light was to make it easier for him to sneak into the city. However, Wu-Ming guessed what Gawain was going to do next. Coincidentally, although Wu-Ming was not a saint, Wu-Ming was not the kind of person who would leave someone in the lurch. Moreover, this was also to save the singularity. If he wanted to ensure that the singularity could be successfully saved, there had to be humans in the singularity, not to mention that the singularity had already begun to collapse. The more humans there were, the more advantageous it would be for the singularity that had already begun to collapse. After all, this way, the singularity's collapse would be delayed, and Gadotsi and the others would have more time. Therefore, Wu-Ming chose to expose himself and let the refugees escape. Although he did not know if the refugees could find a safe place, their fates were no longer in Wu-Ming's hands. Whether it was a blessing or a curse, it was up to fate. However, Gawain shook his head at Wu-Ming, who nodded in affirmation. Sir Villo, even if I let those refugees go, they might not be able to leave alive. They might be eaten by those beasts. You must know that there are more mutated beasts in the wild here than just the soul-eating beast. As the Lion King's close vassal, Gawain knew some secrets. The Solemn Knights had the ability to completely eliminate the surrounding beasts, but Gawain deliberately ordered the Solemn Knights not to take action. His purpose was to keep the beasts and clean up the extra, dirty humans. Because there were too many humans in this singularity, and there were not many humans who could be chosen by the Holy Lance, Gawain kept the wild beasts and let them clean up the humans. Everything was for the king's sake, so Gawain, who knew the truth, did not object. If the refugees encountered wild beasts, there would definitely be casualties. If they were not careful, they might even be wiped out. Don't think that they would be able to leave safely just because they were able to reach the holy city. Gawain was certain that the total number of people who had come to the holy city for the saint selection was definitely more than 100 or 200. So where did the rest go? If they weren't eaten by wild beasts, they would die on the way due to various reasons such as hunger and fatigue. These people who were able to participate in the saint selection had come to the holy city through the sacrifice of others. Of course, there were also people who were lucky, such as the few people who met Wu-Ming. They didn't encounter any danger along the way. After encountering danger, they met Wu-Ming, so they arrived here safely. Therefore, even if Gawain spared those 200 people, they might not be able to leave alive. Moreover, if I report the news of the refugees leaving, Minister Ajegu will definitely send Minister Drizzt or Minister Mordred after them. Don't ask Gawain why he knew. In the past, there were many people who escaped, and those people were killed by Drizzt or Mordred. However, when Wu-Ming heard Gawain's words, he couldn't help but frown. What did you just say? Why is Ajegu the one who gave the order? Where is the king? Ever since we defeated Lionheart, the king has been sleeping. But don't worry, the king chose to sleep to replenish his mana. Gawain was afraid that Wu-Ming was worried that something had happened to Artoria, so he patiently answered. That was indeed the case. After hearing Gawain's words, Wu-Ming's furrowed brows relaxed. If that was the case, then there was nothing that could be done. Compared to being a general, Ajegu was actually more suited to be a civil official. When Artoria or Wu-Ming were not in Camelot, he was always conscientious and meticulous in giving the correct orders. Even though Agrippa's orders were so strict that they couldn't be more strict, even impartial, couldn't fully describe a griffin. In addition, Ager Regulus almost never smiled, which led to his nickname of Iron Ager Regulus. However, Wuming was once again worried. With Ajega's loyalty to Artoria, he naturally wouldn't harm her, but he wasn't so kind to others. It could be said that if he had to choose between Artoria and the Knights of the Round Table, and only one of them could survive, Ajegu would abandon the Knights of the Round Table without hesitation and choose Artoria. In fact, he would even abandon himself when necessary. All of this was for the sake of the king. Wuming, who was familiar with almost everyone in the Knights of the Round Table, was sure that Ajegu was more loyal to Artoria than anyone else. This guy was definitely a die-hard fan. Of course, if it was back in Camelot, it wouldn't be a problem. However, this was not Great Nightingale Island, nor was it Camelot on Great Nightingale Island. This was the new holy city built on the ruins of the holy city of Jerusalem. Wuming finally understood why the refugees were so afraid of Wuming's identity as a Knight of the Round Table. Ajegu was probably the reason. Artoria rarely dealt with political affairs due to her deep sleep, and Ajegu, who handled things for Artoria, was incomparably strict. Everything he was doing now was probably for the sake of the holy baptism, and the holy baptism was probably Artoria's order. In addition to Gawain's personality, Wuming felt that the current Knights of the Round Table might no longer be King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table, but the Lion King's Knights of the Round Table. Shaking his head, Wuming looked at Gawain. "Gawain, let's make a deal." After hearing that Wuming wasn't proposing another bet, Gawain didn't immediately agree. Instead, he shook his head. "This time, I want to hear the contents of the deal first, Lord Villo. I'll go with you to see my king. Tell me what happened between my king and the Knights of the Round Table in this singularity." After thinking about Wuming's words, Gawain nodded and agreed. However, Wuming directly revealed his identity to persuade Artoria. It could be said that Gawain was once again tricked by Wuming, and he even gave away information. The gate of the holy city closed, and the Knights of Solemnity returned to the holy city. Gawain explained to Wuming what happened after he came to this singularity, while leading Wuming to the tallest tower in the center of the new holy city of Camelot. Listening to Gawain's explanation, Wuming raised his head and looked at the tower. Artoria was inside. Chapter 675. Even if they were just ordinary friends, after not seeing each other for a long time, they would still feel a lot of emotions when they were about to meet again. Moreover, Artoria was Wuming's first love. After being apart for so many years, Wuming was a little excited when he was about to meet Artoria again. "Sir Villo? Sir Villo, are you listening?" Gawain shouted a few times, calling back Wuming, who was distracted. "Sorry, Gawain. I missed the days when I was with my king," Wuming said apologetically. "It's all right, Sir Villo. When we see our king again, we're also very excited," Gawain replied with a smile. He didn't think it was wrong to be distracted because of his king. In fact, those who couldn't be distracted because of his king didn't deserve to be called Knights of the Round Table. In fact, Gawain was also a die-hard fan, but not as serious as Agrawain. Where were you just now?" Wuming nodded and motioned for Gawain to continue. "I was just talking about our final crusade against the demons." At this point, Gawain's eyes dimmed a little, but they recovered in an instant. The observant Wuming naturally caught the moment when Gawain's eyes dimmed, and Wuming read the sadness in Gawain's eyes. Although the demons were very strong, there was no enemy that our king and the Knights of the Round Table couldn't defeat. "We successfully killed the Lionheart King. Who sacrificed themselves? Gaholis or Gareth?" Wuming asked directly after Gawain finished speaking. This made Wuming look very cruel at the moment. Both Gareth and Gaholis were Gawain's family. It was Gareth. Gawain was silent for a few seconds before answering Wuming. "That little girl," Wuming said calmly. "I remember that she worships me and Lancelot a lot. To be honest, I still want to meet her. Back in Camelot, she gave me a lot of gifts," Wuming said as if he was reminiscing. Wuming did not pity Gareth because that would be an insult to a knight. I killed her with my own hands, Gawain suddenly said. Wuming was stunned and turned to look at Gawain. What the hell is going on? He thought that Gareth had died in battle, but the result surprised Wuming. But now that he thought about it, there were many loopholes in Gawain's words. Although Gawain said that most of the knights had died in the battle against the Lionheart King's army, powerful knights like Guy, Percival, and Lamarck shouldn't have died so easily. You lied, didn't you, Gawain? Wuming looked at Gawain solemnly. I'm sorry, Lord Villo. I just didn't want you to see our dirty side. Gawain saluted Wuming apologetically. I've already seen how dirty you are in front of the city gate. There's no need to hide it. Wuming was a little angry. Tell me the truth. After Wuming finished, Gawain nodded and started from the beginning again. After the Lionheart King descended to this singularity, she summoned most of the Knights of the Round Table by herself. Except for 3 knights who did not accept the summons, basically all the Knights of the Round Table were present. Wuming was not surprised that the Knights of the Round Table were not present. After all, he and Galahad, who possessed Matthew, could not respond to the king's summons. But who else did not accept the king's summons? Without waiting for Wuming to think, Gawain continued. The king told us that because the master of Chaldea has not arrived, this singularity is about to collapse. Therefore, the king has decided to use the Holy Lance for redemption. She would store the pure-hearted people as specimens into the Holy Lance. This way, even if this singularity was destroyed and the entire human race was burned to ashes, humanity would not be destroyed. Because she used the Holy Lance to preserve the human race. After that, the Lionheart King did not use the form of an order, but told the knights something in the form of an equal conversation. She said this, I've gathered all of you because this plan requires your strength. Although I can annihilate the enemy alone, I can't carry out the consecration. I need the knights as my brothers. But you have to know that this will not be compatible with the creed of all of you. Either obey me, leave me, or gather the power of all of you to defeat me. Give me your answer at sunset. I'll wait until then. Kai Ching instantly stood on the opposite side of the king, and Gahoris also did not hesitate to stand in the camp against the king. Gawain said. His eyes were a little dim, but he recovered in an instant. Because of me and Lancelot, Gareth stood on our side. In other words, before the Knights of the Round Table dealt with the Lionheart King, they first killed each other. Wuming closed his eyes, feeling a little uncomfortable. Humans were not plants and could not be emotionless. Wuming had lived with the Knights of the Round Table for more than 10 years, and if he had to say, the Knights of the Round Table came to the king's side one by one under Wuming's watch. Wuming could say that he knew them like the back of his hand. When they killed each other, their hearts must have been more uncomfortable than Wuming now. Then, as if to prove his inner determination, Gawain looked at Wuming without the slightest hint of avoidance. We killed our compatriots who wanted to stop the king and were stained with the blood of our compatriots. We who have decided to enter hell can bear it, but Gareth is not like us. Gawain shook his head. Her pure heart could not bear such pain. In the end, Gareth used his battered body and hands that were no longer pure white to break down and shed tears. He sacrificed himself to control the Lionheart King. In the end, I killed Gareth and the demon with my sword. Gawain finished speaking, but Wuming could understand that the actual situation was definitely not as simple as Gawain said. Wuming could almost see the scene of the pure and kind little girl crying and begging others to kill her. Wuming could even imagine what the others were like at that time. Lancelot must have been hesitant. He could not accept killing Gareth again. Drizzt would probably just be sad, and Mordred would probably be irritable. Although Mordred was a rebellious knight, she still cared about the Knights of the Round Table. Mordred would probably shout something like, "We can kill this bastard without such a sacrifice." Agrawayne would probably draw his sword and prepare to stab the enemy and his compatriots together. After all, he himself knew that he was suitable to play the role of an evil person. However, Gawain took the initiative to attack first. Wu-ming did not know how Gawain felt when he swung his sword. Perhaps that swing of the sword also cut off Gawain's human emotions. In this way, Gawain was absolutely loyal to the Lion King. In this way, the Lion King's son knight was perfectly born. Just like the bet that Wu-ming proposed with Artoria, Gawain had no choice but to abide by it. Otherwise, it would be an insult to the king. Is everything for the king, Gawain? Yes. You don't regret it? Yes. Then let's go. Take me to see the king, the one who is no longer a human. Chapter 676. After entering the tower and passing through a corridor guarded by knights, Wu-ming and Gawain arrived at a magnificent door. Sir Villo, please take a rest inside. I'll gather the other knights of the Round Table in the Holy City. Gawain bowed to Wu-ming. Although Wu-ming's words seemed to be hostile toward the Lion King, Gawain would still respect Wu-ming as long as their relationship was not completely broken. How many knights are not in the Holy City? Wu-ming looked at the magnificent door and asked Gawain without looking back. Only 2. Lancelot and Mordred are knights of the guerrilla force. They're both outside at the moment. Culistan is the one on standby in the city. Aguan is in charge of things in Steward Wang's place. I'm in charge of guarding the city gate. Wu-ming only asked who was not in the city, but Gawain answered all of them. However, the answer disappointed Wu-ming. So there were only a few knights left. Wu-ming sighed. No need to gather them. I only want to see the Lion King. Wu-ming shook his head. And after meeting the Lion King, there was no way to know whether they were friends or foes. Wu-ming was also grateful that Gawain had told Wu-ming about them. After all, if they became enemies in the end, this information would be very beneficial to Wu-ming. Yes, please help yourself. Gawain bowed to Wu-ming and left. After all, his duty was to guard the city gate. Although it was unlikely that there would be an enemy attack, he still had to fulfill his duty. Seeing that Gawain had left, Wu-ming did not hesitate and pushed the door open. He decided that the moment he saw Artoria, he would give her a good scolding. Sir Villo. Accompanied by a joyful cry, a delicate body instantly pounced into Wu-ming's arms. Wu-ming subconsciously hugged the person who had thrown herself into his arms. Then, he took a closer look. She was a beautiful lady with fair skin and golden curly hair. Guinevere? Why are you here? That's right, the one who jumped into Wu-ming's arms was Guinevere, who had admired Wu-ming for a long time but couldn't be with him because of King Arthur. However, Guinevere did not answer Wu-ming. Instead, he hugged Wu-ming tightly and murmured. Lord Villo, Guinevere misses you so much. Wu-ming didn't say anything else. He removed his armor and hugged Guinevere. Both of them enjoyed this moment of peace. Gradually, Guinevere stopped moving. Wu-ming took a closer look and saw that Guinevere had fallen asleep. It must have been hard for you. Wu-ming touched Guinevere's cheek tenderly. Wu-ming had already experienced from Mai Fu how uncomfortable the feeling of not being able to be with the person he liked was. Not only Maeve, but Wu-ming also decided to give Artoria and Guinevere an answer. Wu-ming closed the door with his telekinesis and gently picked up the sleeping Guinevere. Then, he began to look around the room. Wu-ming wanted to see if there was a bed or something similar for Guinevere to rest. Coincidentally, this place seemed to be a bedroom. Is this Guinevere's bedroom? Then why did Gawain bring me here? Immediately after, Wu-ming suddenly recalled Gawain's smiling face. Wu-ming finally understood what Gawain meant by rest. That shouldn't be the case. My relationship with Guinevere shouldn't have been exposed. No, that's not right. There's nothing going on between Guinevere and me. Wu-ming quickly shook his head. Although the two of them had feelings for each other, they didn't do anything out of line until Wu-ming left. So how did Gawain know? Wu-ming shook his head. It didn't matter how he found out. He would find out later anyway. Wu-ming put Guinevere on the bed. But when he got up, Wu-ming found Guinevere clutching his arm tightly. After a helpless and doting sigh, Wuming sat down beside Guinevere's bed and let Guinevere hold his arm. Since he had nothing to do, Wuming began to meditate. Although meditation didn't have much effect on Wuming, it was still the accumulation of water that could penetrate a stone. After a while, Guinevere woke up. When he saw himself clutching Wuming's arm tightly, Guinevere was startled. "Sir Villo, I'm really sorry. I fell asleep." Guinevere immediately let go of Wuming's arm and stood up to apologize to Wuming. Wuming opened his eyes and turned to look at Guinevere, who sat up. "Don't mind it, Guinevere. After all, I also saw a painting of a sleeping beauty." Wuming's praise made Guinevere blush. Guinevere didn't dare to look at Wuming. "Speaking of which, did you ask Gawain to bring me here?" Wuming asked Guinevere. Guinevere was taken aback. He looked at Wuming with a sweet smile. "As expected of Sir Villo." "That's right. I asked Gao Wenqing to bring Sir Villo here." Although Wuming was puzzled by Gawain's actions, Wuming wasn't stupid. He understood after thinking about it carefully. Guinevere pounced on Wuming the moment he entered the door. If Gawain didn't know about the relationship between Wuming and Guinevere, then Gawain must have received someone's orders to bring Wuming here. "I've already told Gao Wenqing that if Lord Varen comes here, he must bring him to me first. Furthermore, I've given this order to Gao Wenqing on behalf of my king." Then, Guinevere seemed to have thought of something and happily held on to Wuming's arm. After all, the king missed his subjects whom he hadn't seen for a long time. It wasn't a problem for him to meet them in advance. This explained Gawain's strange expression. When Gawain was alive, the relationship between Wuming and Artoria was so good that it didn't seem like a relationship between a king and his subjects. There is no Great Britain now, and the current king is very righteous. She allowed me to marry Sir Villo. Wuming was stunned. No matter how he thought about it, it didn't seem right. After all, Artoria was very strict about things like rules. Even if there was no Great Britain, she wouldn't allow her queen and her knight to be together. Otherwise, she wouldn't have chosen to execute Guinevere because of face. No, the current Artoria was no longer King Arthur. She was the Lion Queen that Wuming felt unfamiliar with. In other words, it wasn't strange that the current Artoria allowed Guinevere to be together. "Guinevere, calm down. Listen to me." Wuming pulled Guinevere away from his arm, then pressed his hands on Guinevere's shoulders and looked into his eyes. "I will give you and Lily an answer, but now isn't the time. Tell me, what happened to the king?" Guinevere was quite happy to hear that he would be given an answer, but when he heard Wuming ask what happened to Artoria, Guinevere's expression became helpless. "The king is no longer human." Chapter 677. I don't know the details. I only know that for some unknown reason, my king didn't die. Instead, he became the king of the undead who walked the earth and couldn't die. After all, Guinevere was Artoria's consort, so he had access to some things. Wuming had some guesses about the unknown reason that Guinevere mentioned. But the strange thing is that my king's body is different from before. If I have to say, my king has grown up. Guinevere pursed his lips in jealousy as he recalled the Lion King, who was even more feminine than himself. Wuming naturally saw that Guinevere was jealous, so he immediately reached out and stroked Guinevere's little head. Guinevere was like a kitten, enjoying the touch of its master. "Ah. By the way, my king no longer uses the holy sword, but the holy spear," Guinevere suddenly added. In Guinevere's opinion, the reason why she didn't use the holy sword was likely that it had been returned to the lake sprite. "Lily's body will inevitably grow because neither the scabbard nor the holy sword will bless her anymore," Wuming explained to Guinevere as he put down his hand from Guinevere's head. Not only did the sword in the stone have a cursed blessing on Artoria, but the scabbard, Avalon, and the holy sword, Excalibur, also had a cursed blessing on Artoria. Her body couldn't grow because of the cursed blessing brought by the sword in the stone. Although Artoria lost the sword in the stone, her body didn't start to grow because of the new holy sword and scabbard. On the other hand, the scabbard gave Artoria the blessing that she would never get hurt or grow old. Although the holy sword did not explicitly state it, in King Arthur's final story, King Arthur's broken body died after Bedivere completely returned the holy sword to him. Therefore, the holy sword also had a hidden blessing for Artoria. However, Wuming was puzzled that Artoria didn't die after the sword in the lake was returned. Logically speaking, after the sword in the lake was returned to the lake sprite, King Arthur should have fallen into a deep sleep. However, Artoria became the king of the undead who couldn't die. However, there was another possibility. If the holy sword wasn't returned to the lake sprite, then Artoria probably couldn't die. The story of Bedivere returning the holy sword 3 times was the best explanation. Artoria was seriously injured. Even with the blood of the red dragon, she couldn't hold on until Bedivere returned the holy sword 3 times before she died. It was probably a blessing that was like a curse. As long as the sword was not returned, Artoria would not die. Guinevere, do you know who didn't respond to Lily's summon? Wuming became a little bit more serious. Guinevere thought carefully and looked at Wuming. I remember that only you, Sir Villo, Galahad, the son of Lancelot, and Bedivere who witnessed the end of King Arthur didn't respond to Her Majesty's summon. It's not strange that you didn't respond to Her Majesty's summon, but it's strange that Galahad and Bedivere didn't respond. Guinevere knew that Wuming's identity was special. However, it was strange that Galahad, who obtained the Holy Grail because of the purity of his soul, and Bedivere, who witnessed the end of King Arthur and was extremely loyal to King Arthur, didn't respond to Her Majesty's summon. While Guinevere was thinking, Wuming was also thinking. As expected, Wuming thought. If Bedivere didn't return the holy sword, then Artoria probably couldn't die. King Arthur, who couldn't die, picked up the holy spear and was summoned to this era. Due to some influence, he became the Lion King. If Bedivere didn't return the holy sword, then where did Bedivere go? His loyalty to Artoria was no less than anyone else's, and his soul was no less than Galahad who obtained the Holy Grail. However, Bedivere didn't respond to Her Majesty's summon. What the hell is going on? Wuming couldn't help but frown. Guinevere came back to his senses and saw Wuming frowning. He couldn't help but panic. Guinevere thought that Wuming was unhappy because he mentioned Lancelot, so Guinevere hurriedly explained to Wuming. That. The legends about me and Lancelot in the future are not true. Nothing happened between me and Lancelot. However, a finger was placed on Guinevere's lips, stopping him from continuing. I'm not frowning because of Lancelot. I'm thinking of something else. Guinevere, you don't have to explain. No matter what, I believe you, Wuming said as he put his finger down. Wuming looked at Guinevere with firm eyes full of trust, which made Guinevere feel very touched. Master Villo. Guinevere covered his mouth with his hands. There were tears in his eyes, and he looked very touched. Good boy, don't cry. As if coaxing his girlfriend, Wuming gently stroked Guinevere's little head, and Guinevere rubbed his head. After that, Wuming and Guinevere chatted. By the way, how did you know it was me who came in? Wuming asked. After all, when Wuming opened the door, Guinevere immediately rushed over. That's because I have a telepathic connection with Master Villo, Guinevere replied playfully. Then, Guinevere was hit by Wuming. Actually, I used magic to find out. Guinevere covered his little head that was hit by Wuming and answered pitifully. Then, Guinevere took out a glowing compass-like gadget. Wuming took it and looked at it carefully. Wuming noticed that after he took the compass-like gadget, the gadget began to glow. Moreover, the compass-like gadget instantly pointed at him. So, this is a device you made to find me? Guinevere nodded honestly. After all, she was also a magician. If there was a person's hair or something like that, Guinevere could still perform a magic trick to find that person. And Wuming was Guinevere's knight, so it was easy for Guinevere to get Wuming's hair. Wuming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Then, Wuming returned the gadget to Guinevere, who put it away like it was a treasure. Then, Guinevere and Wuming chatted. During the conversation, Wuming learned that this was actually Artoria's bedroom. After all, Guinevere gave the order to Gawain using Artoria's identity, so he had to bring it to Artoria's bedroom. However, the reason why Artoria wasn't here was because she happened to wake up today. So, where did Artoria go after waking up? Wuming couldn't help but be curious. At this moment, the door of the room suddenly opened. Chapter 678. A holy light that seemed to pierce through the sky penetrated the wall of the Lion King's bedroom, and it lasted for a long time. After a while, the beam of holy light was retracted, and a large hole appeared on the wall of the Lion King's bedroom. Gawain and Tristan, who were guarding the holy city, were also attracted by the holy light. "My king, are you all right?" Gawain stood respectfully outside the bedroom and greeted the Lion King who was in the bedroom. Tristan stood behind Gawain and respectfully stood without saying a word. Even though they knew something was wrong in the bedroom, without the Lion King's order, they could not and did not dare to barge in. "I'm fine. The Villo has just returned. I was a little excited and had a little competition with the Villo. You can leave now." Artoria's mature and convincing voice came from the bedroom. "I see. The Villo has returned. Since the Villo is here, we will leave now." When Gawain said this, his voice was a little reluctant, but because it was the king's order, Gawain obeyed. "How sad. I will leave now." Tristan, who did not say a word, said this at the end. After that, Gawain and Tristan left. In the room, Artoria was sitting on a throne with her legs crossed. Guinevere was sitting on the edge of the bed without saying a word. Wuming, he was now leaning on the wall with a large hole in it. "Lily, are you really going to kill me?" After using his spirit sense to detect that Gawain and Tristan had left, Wuming immediately spoke. "If you can die from that attack, it only proves that you are too weak." Artoria said seriously without any intention of apologizing. On the other hand, Guinevere, who was watching from the side, pouted. "It's all because the Villo is not romantic." Wuming was speechless. "Well, it is indeed my fault. Putting aside the fact that two women were fighting for your affection, if you suddenly got angry and said, 'It's okay, you can continue,' when they were frightened, anyone would be angry." Even Guinevere, who had always been obedient to Wuming, was slightly dissatisfied this time, let alone Artoria. Although it seemed that Artoria was going to abandon her worldly values and be with Wuming, she was still the Lion King. She was the one who gave the order to the Knights of the Round Table to kill each other. She was the one who led the knights who had completely turned into the Lion King, defeated the arrogant Lionheart, built the new holy city, and carried out the cruel and inhumane saint selection. Thinking of this, Wuming's expression became serious. "I apologize for my rudeness. Now, let's get down to business, Lily." After all, Wuming was here to find Artoria. Artoria nodded nonchalantly. Whether it was as her lover or as her subject, Wuming had the right to negotiate with her. However, Guinevere, who heard Wuming's serious tone, panicked a little. Through the conversation with Wuming, she knew that Wuming was not here to join the Lion King. He was here to cause trouble. Whether it was Artoria or Wuming, both of them were extremely important to Guinevere. One was husband and wife on the surface, but in private, they were best friends. The other was her knight and her lover, so Guinevere did not want to have a conflict between the two. However, whether it was Artoria, Wuming, or Guinevere, she knew that since things had developed to this point, the two of them could not solve the problem without talking. Do you want me to prepare some refreshments?" Guinevere asked hesitantly. Artoria didn't say anything, nor did she move. Wuming nodded. "Go, and remember to prepare more." However, after hearing Wuming's reminder, Guinevere could not help but smile. Why should he prepare more? It was because there was not enough to eat. As for why there was not enough to eat, Guinevere glanced at Artoria, who was unperturbed, and smiled happily. After all, Wuming's words gave Guinevere another meaning, which was that they could not fight. Preparing more refreshments was for them to eat slowly. If they fought, they would not be able to eat anymore. Guinevere nodded with a smile, got up gracefully, and left the room. Seeing Guinevere leave in a good mood, Wuming let out a sigh of relief. He purposely gave Guinevere the feeling that they could not fight. After all, this could not only take care of Guinevere's feelings, but also find a reason to make Guinevere leave. After all, Wuming did not have to fight because he did not want to. Wuming took a deep look at Artoria. He looked at her eyes that were glowing for some unknown reason. Although Artoria was still the familiar one, Wuming knew that the Artoria in front of him was a familiar stranger. She was not the familiar King Arthur, but the unfamiliar Lion King. Perhaps in the past, King Arthur would choose to listen to Wuming, but facing this Lion King, Wuming felt that she would not listen to him. Lily, although you have changed a lot, after what happened just now, I feel that you are still the same Lily. Artoria did not move. Only her glowing eyes flickered. She then looked at Wuming. You too. Although I don't know how many years you have lived, you have not changed at all. You are still the one who pledged to marry me. However, Artoria's words made Wuming feel a little helpless. Don't make it sound so ambiguous. Wuming and Artoria just made a promise that one would be the king for life, and the other would be the king's knight for life. Wuming suppressed the ridicule in his heart and pointed out the window. Then, can you tell me why you want to carry out the holy purification? And what is with those huge craters outside the holy city? Looking at Wuming's serious face and hearing his questioning tone, Artoria's expression did not change at all. She was still so calm, as if there was no emotion. I think you should have seen that those craters were caused by my holy lance. Because those are the enemies of the holy city, they need to be annihilated. Artoria did not stop and continued. The reason why I carried out the holy purification is because it is the best way to save mankind at the moment. Chapter 679. Artoria pointed at the part of the wall behind Wuming that was missing because of the Holy Lance's attack. Because they were on top of the holy city's tower, Wuming and Artoria could see the edge of the world from where they were standing. You should have noticed it as well, right? The edge of this world is constantly shrinking. In the end, the entire world will collapse. The best solution right now is to store humans with pure hearts into my holy spear. Only then can we ensure the existence and continuation of humanity. Then, why don't you cooperate with Chaldea? They have the ability to save this era. If it were you, you wouldn't hesitate to cooperate with them, right? Wuming asked in confusion. However, Artoria shook her head. They came too late. I can't leave the fate of the human race in their hands. If I did nothing but wait for their arrival, and if they deliberately got entangled in the first few months, this era would collapse, and the human race would be completely hopeless. Therefore, I made my choice. Moreover, the one who holds the Holy Grail is the king of the desert in the west. From the moment I arrived in this world, I knew that he had the temple as a defense. I couldn't take him down before this era collapsed. Therefore, I chose to have a truce with him and take another path to save the human race, which is to carry out the holy ascension. But you abandoned the other people of this era, Wuming retorted instantly, and his tone was a little angry. And the humans you collected will become specimens. That can't be called the continuation of the human race at all. Wuming clenched his fist and slammed it on the wall behind him. A part of the wall that was already broken and disappeared was damaged again. Another part of the wall broke and fell down the tower. After that, Wuming walked in front of Artoria and looked at the goddess-like beauty. You have been affected by the Holy Lance for a long time. You are no longer a human, and you are no longer a specter. You have become a god that I don't like. You have been assimilated by the Holy Lance, Lungaminiad. Lungaminiad, the goddess. Artoria's eyes flickered slightly. Although it disappeared quickly, Wuming still caught it. When Wuming saw Artoria, he noticed that his half-godslayer soul reacted to her. This meant that Artoria had become a god. The only way Wu Ming could imagine Artoria becoming a god was to be assimilated by Lungominiad. After all, it was an anchor that connected the two sides of the world. It would be fine if someone like Wu Ming had it, but if it was just a king with the red dragon bloodline, he would inevitably be assimilated. Wu Ming even felt some regret. He regretted that he did not add his blood into Artoria when Merlin, King User, and the others created her. Putting aside the fact that King Arthur had Artoria's bloodline, at the very least, Artoria wouldn't be assimilated by the Holy Spear to such an extent. If it were you in the past, you would have tried to find a way to get the best of both worlds. Although I don't like your personality in the past, I don't like the current you even more. I don't think I've done anything wrong. It's all for the sake of mankind. Artoria looked into Wu Ming's eyes without hesitation. Wu Ming also looked at Artoria's serious eyes. Her eyes were both familiar and strange, and they made him feel sad. Artoria was always considerate of the people. She was born for the sake of the people. She became a king for the sake of the people. She kept fighting and killing for the sake of the people. However, because of her selfless sacrifice, the people and even some of the Knights of the Round Table were afraid of her. Although it was Tristan who said that kings do not understand people's hearts, who could guarantee that the people did not have the same thought? Maybe they already had such thoughts in their hearts, but they did not dare to say it out loud. In the end, she was betrayed by the people she protected. Until her death, she still turned into a heroic spirit to protect her people who belonged to the human race. And the Lion King in front of them was one of the many possibilities for Artoria. Because of special reasons, Artoria did not die. Instead, she picked up the Holy Lance. After receiving the Holy Lance, not only did her body develop quite well, but her heart also developed quite well. She was infinitely close to becoming a god. However, her main purpose was still to protect the human race. That was why she used such an extreme method. In Wu Ming's opinion, the reason why some of the Knights of the Round Table chose to stand against Artoria after she announced her decision was that they did not want their beloved king to continue making mistakes like this. The most obvious example was Kai. Kai was Artoria's sworn brother. Although he did not have much contact with Artoria because of Wu Ming, he and Artoria were sworn siblings after all. Because he knew Artoria well, Kai did not hesitate to stand against her. If Kai was still here, he would definitely say something like this. Since Lord Villo is not here, let me, your sworn brother, correct the king's mistake. However, Kai had already left. He was defeated by the Knights of the Round Table who stood on Artoria's side. Most of the Knights of the Round Table who chose to stand on Artoria's side wanted to show their loyalty to the king. Lancelot, Tristan, Agravain, and Gawain were all loyal to the king. Because he was the cause of the destruction of half of Camelot, Lancelot felt guilty toward Artoria. Tristan also felt guilty because he was the first to speak. Argervan had always been foolishly loyal to Artoria. Gawain also felt guilty, because the destruction of Camelot could be considered to have been caused by his obsession. Unlike the Knights of the Round Table who stood on the opposite side of Artoria, these Knights of the Round Table did not care about the king's right or wrong. They just wanted to show their loyalty as the king's knights. The Knights of the Round Table who stood on the opposite side of the king were also loyal to the king. However, they did not want to be blindly loyal. They did not want to see the king go astray, so they stood on the opposite side of the king. So, are you going to stop me, just like Kai and the others? Artoria sat and looked up at Wu Ming who was standing in front of her. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Kacha, the sound of the door opening could be heard. Guinevere walked in with a small cart used for serving food. I've prepared the snacks. However, when he saw the tense atmosphere between Artoria and Wu Ming, Guinevere was scared speechless. Are you guys okay? Guinevere forced a smile. Chapter 680. Don't worry, nothing will happen to me and Lily. Wu Ming smiled at Guinevere with a look that said, nothing will happen to us. Wuming walked to Guinevere and took the cart from Guinevere's hand. He then looked at Artoria. Let's have some snacks first. Ever since you became the queen, we barely had time to eat snacks together. Artoria stared at the snacks on the cart and nodded. No matter how things changed, Artoria's attitude towards food would not change. Seeing Artoria like this, Wuming couldn't help but feel relieved. Wuming pushed the cart over, picked up a snack, and put it in front of Artoria. Artoria paused and then looked at Wuming. Take it as an apology for not responding to your call in time, Lily, Wuming said with a gentle smile. Artoria didn't say anything, and her expression didn't change. After all, she was the queen. How could she accept food from others? Guinevere thought. But just when Guinevere thought Artoria refused, Artoria opened her mouth and ate the snack that Wuming gave her. I miss it, Artoria said softly. Guinevere was jealous. Mr. Villo, I want some too, Guinevere clung to Wuming and pouted. Yes, just like that, Wuming began the game of snacks, which was actually food. After the snacks were eaten, the negotiation between Wuming and Artoria also ended. I won't be your enemy, Lily. After all, Artoria gave the Knights of the Round Table 3 choices. One was to kill her, the second was to join her, and the third was to leave her. I will leave, but I will come back again. After Wuming said those words like a villain, he left the holy city without any hesitation. Although she knew that Wuming might become her enemy in the future, Artoria didn't stop Wuming. Artoria just gave an order to all the knights of the holy city, and then fell asleep again. The British silver dragon Villo, Sarenth Ed, has become a rebel knight. If you meet him in the future, you can fight him. Gawain and Agrawin, who stayed in the holy city, were shocked, but they were completely loyal to Artoria and immediately accepted the order. Guinevere sat by the window, looked at the direction where Wuming left, and sighed. Mr. Villo, after he left the holy city, Wuming, he had been going west. Wuming didn't want to be an enemy of Artoria, but he could be an enemy of the servant in the desert in the west. He could take the Holy Grail from the servant, and then find Gadotsi and the others, and restore the humanity before Artoria's plan could be carried out. After all, if Artoria's plan was successful, then even if the singularity didn't completely collapse, it would collapse because of Artoria's plan. In short, the Holy Lance was the rocket, the pure-hearted people were the transportation materials, and the entire singularity, including other humans, was the fuel to push the rocket. The fuel would be burned out, and the rocket would be successfully launched at the cost of the fuel. And even if Wuming defeated Artoria, the central control center, if the Holy Grail was not recovered, the singularity's collapse would continue. Therefore, Wuming decided to kill the Desert King first, recover the Holy Grail, find Gadotsi, and restore the humanity. Unknowingly, Wuming had already walked to the wilderness before. According to Wuming's guess, this was probably the battlefield of the war that took place in this singularity. Whether it was the Crusaders and the former holy city of Jerusalem, the Lion King and the Lionheart King, or even the current Lion King and the Desert King, the main battlefield was likely to be here. Therefore, the land here was completely dead, the trees withered, and lost their vitality. Gradually, Wuming walked to the place where he first appeared. There was a sunken circle on the ground here. This was a small trick Wuming used to trap the refugees. After Wuming released the refugees, he didn't repair this place. After all, after the singularity was restored, this place would also be restored. Now it seems that this place can be used as a marker. After all, this place was quite obvious, although Wuming wouldn't get lost. After briefly reminiscing about this place, Wuming left. After all, Wuming still didn't know the enemy's information. No, it couldn't be said that he didn't know, it should be said that he didn't know at all. Wuming only knew that the other party was a pharaoh, that was all. If I knew earlier, I would have asked Lily and Veer about the Sun King, however, since things had come to this, Wuming couldn't go back. After all, I'm not weak. Wuming encouraged himself. Magic power condensed in his eyes, Wuming looked ahead, and not far away, there was a place where sand was faintly visible. That should be the edge of the desert. Although that was the case, Wuming only saw sparse sand in the place, and many places were still lifeless wastelands. Let's prepare a little. The magic power in his eyes dissipated, and Wuming said lightly. After the magic power in his eyes dissipated, more magic power emerged from Wuming's body. Blue magic power condensed from Wuming's body, like a blue flame burning Wuming's body. In an instant, the blue flame dissipated, and what was revealed was an armor formed by magic power. Then there was a cracking sound, and some fragments of armor appeared on Wuming's back. The fragments surrounded Wuming's head and turned into a helmet that looked like a dragon's head. Wuming waved his hand, and a red cape appeared from his shoulders, fluttering with the wind. Then, Wuming's body flew up. After all, walking was a bit slow, so Wuming chose to use telekinesis to fly. Telekinesis was not magic, it was the evolution of powerful mental power, so it was not limited to factors such as spirit base and magic power. Just like that, Wuming began to fly toward the desert in the west. However, it wasn't long before Wuming discovered that many figures had appeared below him. Wuming took a closer look, and at the end of the black mass of figures, there was a knight in armor. Wuming took a closer look, and it was actually Tristan. Tristan. Why is he here? Wuming was puzzled. But after seeing other things, Wuming was no longer puzzled. He was chasing some refugees, and those refugees were the ones Wuming saved from Gawain at the city gate. You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.